Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Planning Committee meeting. I'm Liz Schell, Chair. We have our full committee with us, Vice Chair Councillor Neal, Councillor McLaren, Councillor Osanek, Councillor Turner, and Councillor Allen. And we have a number of staff members here. We have our Commissioner Hurdle, Director Agnew, and Manager Vendetti. And starting on this side, Manager Newman, Planner Argawal, Planner Diedrichsen, Planner Sands, and Planner Lambert. Our clerk is here, Mr. Bolognone, and our deputy clerk, Ms. Janes, are also here. Our Director of Legal Services, Ms. Nicholson, and Ms. Ray, as also a member of our legal department, one of our newer staff members. I think that's everyone. And now I will open the meeting with the usual preamble. Oh, and our clerk, Derek Oshedge, this is your first clerk duty tonight for the Planning Committee. Notice of collection. Personal information collected as a result of this public hearing and on the forms provided at the back of the room is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and will be used to assist in making a decision on this matter. All names, addresses, opinions, and comments may be collected and may form part of the minutes, which will be available to the public. Questions regarding this collection should be forwarded to the Director of Planning, Building, and Licensing Services. The purpose of public meetings is to present planning applications in a public forum as required by the Planning Act. Following presentations by the applicant, committee members will be afforded an opportunity to ask questions for clarification or further information. The meeting will then be open to the public for comments and questions. Interested persons are requested to give their name and address for recording in the minutes. There is also a sign-in sheet for interested members of the public at the back of the room. No decisions are made at public meetings concerning applications unless otherwise noted. The public meeting is held to gather public opinion. Exemption to this rule is outlined in bylaw number 2006-75 to delegate various planning approvals to staff and to adopt certain procedures for the processing of planning applications subject to delegated authority. Council has authorized staff to use discretion in determining if an application can be a combined public meeting comprehensive report to expedite the approval process. We do have combined public meetings comprehensive reports for a zoning bylaw amendment to 40 Crescent Drive and 3955 Pine Grove Road. A decision will be made at the regular portion of the Planning Committee meeting tonight. Information gathered at public meetings is then referred back to Planning, Building, and Licensing Services staff for the preparation of a comprehensive report and recommendation to Planning Committee. This means that after the meeting tonight, staff will be considering the comments made by the public in their further review of the applications. When this review is completed, a report will be prepared making a recommendation for action to this committee. The recommendation is typically to approve or to deny. This committee then makes a recommendation on the applications to City Council. City Council has the final say on the applications from the city's perspective. Following council decision, notice will be circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and anyone with an interest in the matter may file an appeal. Interested persons are advised that if a person or a public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council to the Ontario Municipal Board unless, in the opinion of the board, there are reasonable grounds to do so. And with that, I would like to open our first public meeting. It's an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 1100 Princess Street. Okay.
Good evening, and through you, Madam Chair. My name is Jennifer Guerra. I'm a land use planner with Foten Consultants, and I'm here tonight to present a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 1100 Princess Street on behalf of Choice Properties. And here tonight is a representative from Choice Properties, Joseph Seymour. So 1100 Princess Street is located within the larger Kingston Center, which, as I'm sure as most of you know, is a fairly large commercial plaza that accommodates a fairly wide range of commercial uses. It's bound by Princess Street to the north, Bath Road to the south, and Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard to the west. While it's not within the central business district, this is a fairly central site. It has excellent access to Kingston Transit. It's a main transfer point. And it's surrounded by a well-established residential neighborhood to the west, to the south, and to the southeast. And there are existing commercial uses to the north as well. Looking a little bit closer now at the site, you can see that there's existing development on site. The larger building is a Loblaws grocery store, and there's also a large parking area there now. The site has two entrances, one off of Princess Street to the north and one off of Sir John A. Macdonald to the west. The site is also accessible internally to the Kingston Center off of a privately owned internal roadway that runs north-south between Princess and Bath Road. To the west, you can see there are various residential uses, mostly high-density apartment buildings as well as some row house dwellings. The parcel to the south is currently vacant but is designated for commercial development, and to the east is the balance of the Kingston Center lands. Just quickly looking at existing conditions, this is the site when viewed from Princess Street. So for the most part, you see a parking lot and you can see the Loblaws grocery store that exists, which is set back to the rear of the lot. Coming around to the Sir John A. Macdonald's frontage, again, you have mostly parking area, but as you move further south down the frontage, you can see the back side of the Loblaws and its associated loading areas. What we're proposing on the site is a new 372 square meter fast food restaurant with drive-through facility. The site will accommodate and provide 485 parking spaces. So this is provided for both the Loblaws and the restaurant since they're located on the same parcel. It will utilize the existing vehicular entrances and the building will be oriented towards Princess Street. Here's a conceptual site plan of the site, and I will zoom into the area of the proposed development, but just to give you a sense of the broader context. You can see the large building on the bottom left is the existing Loblaws facility and the parking area to the right. The proposed restaurant is the small block in the northwest corner close to the intersection of Princess and Sir John A. And zooming in a little bit, again, you can see the proposed restaurant. It will be, again, 372 square meters, which is roughly 4,000 square feet. It's a single story in height. It's been oriented towards Princess Street and set back 3 meters. The drive-through aisle is situated on the west-hand side of the lot and will wrap along Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard. You'll enter it from the south portion of the site, and then cars will come northbound and then wrap around and exit once they've passed the building. The main entrance to the restaurant is on that southeast, if this works, southeast wall. This arrow here is where the main entrance will be, and we're actually providing a pretty generous walkway as you come out, which will connect directly to the Princess Street sidewalk, and will also connect to a crosswalk that leads to the larger parking area to the south. You can't see the vegetation on this plan, it's on the landscape plan, but the majority of existing vegetation will be maintained. As well, we'll be providing new vegetation in medians throughout the parking area, as well as along Princess and Sir John A. And we're also providing a new walkway, if you can see my mouse, which will extend off of the Princess Street sidewalk and go south towards a walkway that connects directly to Loblaws. This is a very, obviously, preliminary elevation rendering of what the building will look like. Just to provide a sense of scale and massing, it's again a one-story structure. We're looking at providing a significant amount of glazing as well, and the more detailed design, materials, articulation will all come out of the more detailed site plan control application. But this gives a sense of generally what the building would look like. We provided a couple supporting technical studies. From a stormwater management perspective, we're actually reducing stormwater flows from the site because we're decreasing impervious surface area. A noise impact study was also done, which looked at rooftop noise impacts as well as the drive-through itself, both the order board and idling cars, and it was found that the noise generated was not a concern. It didn't exceed ministry criteria levels, so no noise control measures were required. The whole Kingston Center is designated district commercial on Schedule 3A of the official plan, and permitted uses include a wide range of frequently used services and products, including food, at a scale that's suitable to service the surrounding neighborhoods. This is a relatively small restaurant, 30 seats, a drive-through. It is intended to serve the immediate area and is not intended to be a draw for a more regional clientele. I won't spend too much time, but there are criteria in the OP that we're to consider when looking at new proposed development in district commercial designations, and generally this proposal conforms to all of these requirements. It's located on 2 arterial roads. It's close to medium and high density residential. Development is occurring on a single site that's planned in a comprehensive manner. We're limiting the scale of the use and the total development size to in keeping with the local service needs. We're limiting, if not avoiding, traffic increases on local streets. We're meeting the site plan control requirements of Section 3.418, and we've prepared the required studies to look at this project from a technical perspective. And finally, for the official plan, there are a few policies that look specifically at the Kingston Center. And what these policies require is to consider a plan for the entire site that addresses all facets, so access, circulation, parking, landscaping, streetscaping. So what we've done is not only provided a site plan for 1100 Princess Street, but a plan for the larger Kingston Center, hoping that we can show how the proposed development will fit in and integrate with a larger site from a circulation and a parking perspective. Traffic impact and market justification studies may be required according to the policies, but based on the scale and nature of this development, they were determined not to be necessary here. The existing regulatory framework is slightly confusing. It's currently a C385 zone, it's site-specific. There are also 2 minor variances in place since the site-specific zone, which I'll go over. The permitted uses are pretty broad: retail, shopping center, department stores, fairly all-encompassing, including a restaurant use. So like I said, there is existing site-specific zoning. There are 2 minor variances which have changed the parking ratio requirement twice. There are site-specific reliefs for the laws for setbacks. So what we're proposing is a revised C385 zone that's going to recognize all of those previously granted reliefs. The new provisions that we're looking at getting relief from are listed in those 4 points. And the first is providing a reduced setback from Princess Street. So we're looking at 3 meters, attempting to bring that building up to the street front, orient it towards the sidewalk, but still providing 3 meters in order to provide for canopies and an area for people to be able to interact with that public realm. We're reducing the setback of the drive-through facility from an existing residential zone, and that setback is 21 meters. Those are the apartment buildings to the west. We are also seeking to reduce the parking stall length for both standard and barrier-free. And we're also seeking to permit off-site parking. And I'm going to explain this because I know that this sounds a little silly in this context. The subject site is outlined in red, and that blue highlighted area is parking that functionally serves the Loblaws and the proposed use, but doesn't actually fall within the property boundaries or the zone boundaries, so it doesn't count for zoning purposes. So we're seeking off-site parking to allow that parking to count for zoning purposes, and we will need to provide, to meet the zoning bylaw, some additional off-site parking in the parking area just to the east of that blue area, which is also owned by Choice Properties. This is a summary of all of the reliefs collectively. I'll just summarize. There are a number of existing ones that we're looking at consolidating here, as well as the new reliefs that I referenced before. And in summary, the use and development we're proposing is consistent with the broad direction of the OP. It's compatible with adjacent uses and consistent with both the district commercial and the Kingston Center policies, and it represents appropriate commercial infill development. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I hear from staff, please? Sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can confirm that notice of this public meeting was given pursuant to the requirements of the Planning Act, and we haven't received any written correspondence from members of the public regarding this application. Thank you.
Thank you. And questions from the committee? Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is the proposed drive-through, is it going to be 24/7?
That's a good question, and I think that's yet to be determined at this time because we haven't actually solidified a tenant. So potentially, but that's yet to be determined.
Thank you. And my other question is, if you could go to the slide where you just showed that using the off-site parking.
Sure.
That one, right. So if someone's turning into the Kingston Center from Princess Street, and so they're, coming in where the TD Bank is, so just on the right-hand side of the blue, which is just a landscaped area, right? And then they want to go, like if it's a Tim Hortons, whatever it is, they want to go to the Tim Hortons. So they would come down to the four-way stop sign from that direction, right? And then when they come in, those cars, like that traffic going to that facility, would go pass right in front of Loblaws. Is that it? Is that the direction that you would, coming from Princess, that you would want the cars to go to get into that corner right in front of the store?
If, in theory, that off-site parking were to be used by people frequenting the Tim Hortons, yes, they would be parking in front of the TD and then walking across that area. However, we're not anticipating people to have to do that. Choice Properties did a parking utilization study a couple years ago, which showed that at peak times, parking utilization was only as high as 60% on the site. Typically, it's as low as 20 to 30%, so there's a significant oversupply of parking. To give you a sense of how much we're talking about that's being provided over there, the overall required parking is 485 spaces. Between the site itself and that blue highlighted area, which functionally is part of the site, we're providing 426 of those spaces, and 59 would be off-site to the east of that central drive aisle. But like I said, given the significant oversupply of parking here, we don't actually anticipate that anyone will be required to park there and go all the way over.
Thank you. And if they wanted to stay in their car and just go through the drive-through, so that's the direction cars coming off for Princess will go through, right in front of right in front of Loblaws. Because I find that Loblaws, it is really congested. If you're driving by, there's lots of people going there out of the store to the cars and, that are shoppers for Loblaws. And if we're now having a lot of traffic going through, if it's a Tim Hortons through the drive-through, they're going to be in their car. And I'm just wondering if Loblaws is okay with that extra traffic that could potentially be running down their customers with the shopping carts. That's my concern, right, is the safety of the pedestrians coming out of the store.
Mm-hmm. Well, Choice Properties owns the entire site. In fact, they own the whole Kingston Center except for Canadian Tire, so they're actively engaged with Loblaws through this entire process. In fact, as part of the noise study, the noise consultant had to get on top of the Loblaws roof to look at all of their HVAC systems. So Loblaws is aware of this proposed development, and Choice Properties is actively working with them through the process, and there haven't been any concerns identified. In fact, this might be a great amenity and a draw to the location for both employees and their clientele.
Councillor Neal.
Very quick question. Am I going to lose my seasonal garden center? Will they be able to relocate it on the site?
Yes. So it's going to be relocated. I don't know if you can see the dashed line right here. So it will still be there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions from the committee? I'd like to open this application to the floor. Are there any comments or questions? Yes, sir, if you'd like to give your name and address, please. And 5 minutes.
Hello, my name's Gavin Anderson. Do I have to give my address? I forget. 702 Newmarket. I'm not sure whether I heard correctly, but did you say that there was no traffic study required for this? That there was some consideration given to that, and but no actual study is proposed? Because my concern would be, I'm quite familiar with that shopping center, and particularly that north-south road that you refer to as a private road. It has a lot of bus traffic. It has a lot of different type of traffic going through. It can become quite congested. I was encouraged to see that you are going to put a sidewalk, because it's a pedestrian nightmare. The whole Kingston Centre actually is a pedestrian nightmare, and given its proximity to LCVI and a lot of foot traffic in the area of students, I guess I would like a deeper explanation of why you see that you don't need to have a careful look at traffic patterns, including how, because being on the corner that it is, there will be situations where people can enter but not leave going in the same direction, which is going to require them to make convoluted use of the parking lot. So essentially, that's my question. I'm hoping that you have some explanation to that.
And I'll hold the answers till I see if there are other members of the public have questions or concerns. Yes, ma'am. Name and address, please.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Lisa Figa, 320 Queen Street. My question is about the parking and the curb cuts and the considerations that you've made for disability parking and curb cuts and access for people with that have mobility devices.
Thank you. And I'll, yes, ma'am.
Susanna Cliff-Jüngling at 28 Alma Street. From the presentation, maybe I just didn't quite catch it, but it's not clear to me what the difference is. I think I heard that there were the 3-meter setbacks that you're proposing, but what would be the actual policy is right now? And similarly, I'm not clear on the ones towards John Counter Boulevard. I think you mentioned that too, and it's on the list. But what was on the list was only what is proposed, but not the comparison to what the policy would describe.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Frank Dixon, 495 Alfred, Apartment 2, K7K 4J4. I'm also going to follow up on some of the previous points. I'm a patron of Loblaws up there fairly often, and generally other stores and so forth in the center, and it is a very busy area for traffic, as people have said. There's probably a dozen routes of Kingston Transit that are coming by there. You got express routes, you have the regular routes coming in to the transfer point, and there's a lot of traffic, as people have said. It's not a great design, and I think we have to have more detail on how this project is going to impact the already problematic traffic elements. And I'd also like to see a graphic in your display clearly showing the details of the drive-through. I'm still a little bit unclear as to how that happens, because there's a lot of other elements on each of the schematics. So I think it would be good to produce one that has just the drive-through part only, because that's a very busy intersection, right? You've got Bath Road is just to the south. You've got Sir John A, which is really busy, and then you have Princess. All three are arterials, right? So since it's a drive-through plan that you're proposing, I think a careful analysis of the impact is needed. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who wish to speak? Yes, Mr. Jackson?
I'm also a trustee of the Limestone District School Board representing LCVI. I live at 416 Elliott Avenue. And my question simply again is on the pedestrian access. As many members of the committee and the public are probably aware, the student population of LCVI will be increasing for the next few years. And we anticipate a large amount of student pedestrian traffic going through this particular area. So I don't have any particular objection to the plan for this project, but as other speakers have mentioned, the pedestrian access issue and safety issue, perhaps more importantly, is a bit hazy, and it would be useful to have that clarified. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other members of the public who would like to speak to this application? Okay.
Forgot. I'm not quite sure why it would just be a one-story building when there's all these kinds of discussions on intensification. So it seems rather odd to have a one-story building. And the other question, just because it came up, is this really a good place for what I would consider probably a fast food, because it's a drive-through, a fast food restaurant? Given the schools in the area, is that really what we want our children to eat?
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Once I close the floor to the comments or questions, I will be asking the proponent for her responses, and then I'll go back to the committee. So this is your chance. Okay, seeing no more questions, thank you. Would you like to respond, Ms.
Yes,
Guerra?
thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I'm going to start from the beginning and work my way through. There was a question as to why a traffic impact study was not required. I can't speak on behalf of staff, but as to why it wasn't required, but I can say that yes, this is a busy shopping center overall. There is a lot of traffic movement in and out. This is a main bus transfer point, so you have a lot of transit movement throughout the site. We aren't proposing to alter any of the existing drive aisles or entrances. We're going to be using what's already there. The parking layout will generally be maintained in its existing configuration. So while yes, there will be for sure an increase in traffic on the site, due to the number of various access points, we have one off of Sir John A. Macdonald and on Princess. Granted, those are only right-in and right-out exits and entrances. There are also two opportunities to access the site internally off of the internal north-south road. So I think between all of those various access points, as well as an increase in pedestrian infrastructure, we're very close to an existing a bus stop as well. I think the combination of all of those factors will ensure that traffic circulation is okay. There was a question about curb cuts. We do provide curb cuts on the site. So there are two barrier-free spaces directly adjacent to the restaurant. And I'm going to try to see if I can zoom in, because this isn't very helpful, I don't think. Can maybe see a little bit better. There are two barrier-free parking spaces right beside the main entrance, and this area here, these symbols, basically show that that's all cut curb. As there are curb cuts throughout the site in order to provide adequate barrier-free access as well. There was a question about what are the actual setbacks versus the proposed setbacks. So the restaurant is proposed to be set back 3 meters from the Princess Street lot line. The requirement is 38 meters, I believe. And this is, I feel, a dated provision, and it doesn't reflect current official plan policies, which instead of the typical approach or the old approach, which is to put the building at the back and all the parking up front, the desire more so now is to bring buildings up to the street, orient them towards the municipal sidewalk. This entrance will be directly connected to the sidewalk, providing easy access. So it is a significant relief from 38 meters down to 3. In terms of the laws, I'll just bring it back up. Sorry, I wanted to zoom in to show you. The Loblaws is currently, will be set back 6.6 meters from Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard. I believe the requirement is 45. So that's where that relief comes from, to recognize the existing situation. Why is this only one story? Certainly there's a desire and a push to have intensification, particularly along the Princess Street corridor. But I think given the size of the site and the angle at which the corner is, it maybe wouldn't be appropriate to put a larger building in this location. It's really a small infill project, and I'm not sure that a taller building in this standalone location would necessarily be appropriate. It's something that could work, but I think the desire here is to include a restaurant. Is there a graphic showing details of the drive-through? There are details of the drive-through on the site plan. I recognize that it's very difficult to see those fine details on the screen, but I think if you can access the information through Dash, there might be an opportunity to zoom in on those details. There's details such as the width, turning radius, etc., which I'd be happy to provide as well if those aren't available online. And I recognize the comment about the desire to have increased pedestrian safety, particularly given the anticipated increase in student population here.
Thank you very much. Further questions from the committee? Councillor Neal?
Just very quickly, at site plan, perhaps we can make sure that the driving lanes for the drive-through are clearly separated with some kind of partitioning. Otherwise, we'll have cyclists and pedestrians wandering across that space, which is troublesome. And that brings up the whole concept of perhaps, since you have the entrance and exit on existing entrance and exits from the main site, I can see the rationale for saying you don't need a full traffic study. However, you probably need a full pedestrian study, because this is going to increasingly be the place, and I taught high school for 28 years, where the kids will be, all those bulletproof kids are going to be scrambling across the road to get to their favorite fast food restaurant. Mm-hmm. And so we definitely need some kind of a pedestrian review for that area. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, and I don't want to sound like a scold, but I'm going to say this anyway. When you are asking for what you're seeking is a minor variance to 3 meters, please tell us what the actual meters are. Otherwise, a skeptic would think you're trying to pull one over on us. Because the difference between 38 and 3, it doesn't sound minor. So we need some kind of rationale for accepting that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other, oh, Ms. Argwal, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to clarify that the city's traffic engineer was consulted with respect to the requirement for a traffic study. And since the proposed restaurant will be using existing accesses along Princess Street and Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard, and since this site is adjacent to a signalized intersection, a traffic study was not required. I would also just like to clarify the required yards along Princess Street and Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard and what's being proposed. Along Princess Street, a front yard of 45 meters is required, and the proposed is 3 meters. And along Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard, front yard requirement is 38 meters, and 6.6 meters is being proposed to recognize the existing yard along Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard for the Loblaws building. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Ms. Vendetti.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just to add to that, Ms. Guerra indicated that they're not certain who the tenant is necessarily going to be at this point in time. We are processing a site plan control application. We're happy to follow up with engineering and bring forward some of the comments that were made tonight with respect to traffic. A lot of times, depending on who the tenant is and the nature of the drive-through going in, we do request traffic studies. So through the site plan control process, we can further those discussions, and we can absolutely look at pedestrian crossings and pedestrian routes through the site, as well as whether or not, depending on the nature of the tenant, we do want to see some additional traffic information.
Thank you. Any other questions? And I will just remind everyone, this is the public meeting, but you are welcome to contact Planner Agrawal at any time. Staff will be processing this application. They've been, as you see, taking in comments, and this is just the beginning of the process. So if you have other questions or comments, please be sure to get in touch with Ms. Agrawal. Her contact information is in the agenda. And I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation, and I will close this public meeting. And I will open our second public meeting, and it's an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 40 Crescent Drive. Applicants Mark McCritcher and Chris Boot.
Hello there. My name is Chris Boot. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Hopefully my proposal is a little bit simpler than my predecessor. My partner and I own 40 Crescent Drive. We purchased it probably about 7-8 years ago now. And this is 40 Crescent Drive. It was built in 1966 as on a single family lot. So it's currently zoned R1-3. But it's a semi-detached. It has a party wall through the center of it. The fire separation is all intact. So what we would like to do is split it down the middle, as it should have been done in 1966. It currently has 2 services running into the house. The water and service come in from the back of the house, and they're from a deeded easement. The water and sewer was inspected by the city and found to be sound. Hydro and gas are separately metered for both properties. So we're proposing to sever along the common party wall pending zoning approval. So we would like to change the zoning from R1-3 to R2 and allow for separately conveyable parcels. R2 permits semi-detached dwellings. We're making no changes to the exterior of the structure. So basically, that's 40B, 40A. This is the rear of the property, and I included pictures of the fire separation for you. So hopefully mine's fairly straightforward and simple.
Thank you very much. Could we hear from staff, please? Mr. Sands?
Through you, Madam Chair. The application was noticed as per the requirements of the Planning Act, and to date, there has been no written correspondence received. Thanks.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Councillor Neal?
This is probably a question to staff more than the proponent. Is this kind of separation a common aspect, and is there some kind of easement agreements, or is everything kind of, I'm having trouble seeing how you can split a wall in half, but perhaps staff could speak to that.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's very common to receive severance applications to sever a common party wall. We receive them for townhouses frequently. We receive them for semi-detached dwelling units. A lot of times it's done through a plan of subdivision process, so they don't come before the committee. But in this case, where we have older semi-detached homes on a single family or on a single lot, we see these quite frequently. The reason the committee doesn't see them a lot of times is it is a delegated approval to staff if it meets all of the requirements of the zoning bylaw in terms of doing the severance. So in this case, they needed relief from the zoning bylaw.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? I'd like to open this to the floor. Are there any comments or questions from members of the public? Seeing none, and no more questions from the committee. Councillor Neal?
I might as well ask this question now rather than wait till later. Typically, when something has a public meeting, immediately followed by a comprehensive recommendation, I always ask this question because it seems strange having a public meeting when there's already a recommendation. I'm just asking the planners, has there been any feedback from the immediate neighborhood and either communication?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. To date, I have received, I believe, 3 phone calls, essentially seeking clarification to what the applicant is proposing, as the language in the description and the notice was not understood. And once clarification was received, there was no further interest in the proposal.
And I've also spoken to a few of the neighbors who've asked questions when I've been over there. So I'm just trying to make it clear that we're not really doing anything other than just putting the property right.
Yeah, I can comfortably vote for this tonight, but normally I try to defer if there's been any kind of pushback in the community.
I understand.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, I will thank you for your presentation and close this public meeting.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Our next public meeting that I will open is an application for zoning bylaw amendment 3955 Pine Grove Road, Thousand Islands Recreational Aviation Center. Is there someone who wishes to speak to this application?
Yeah, so if you'd like, you can just scroll through the maps here. I'm Roger Gibson. I'm the president of TIRAC, or the Thousand Islands Aviation Recreational Center, TIRAC for the short form. This is a public meeting to sever 60.4238 hectares, which is, for anybody like myself, it's roughly 150 acres, separated away from the existing property known as the Gananoque Airport. The land basically is land being returned to its original use, which was farmland in 1941 that was expropriated by the federal government for one of 2 aerodromes in Ontario. There's only 2, one in London and one in Gananoque, that was used in World War II for training facility. The reason this is being severed at this point is the Sunnyvault Farms have would like to purchase this to add on to their existing property, and it will give TIRAC, which is a nonprofit corporation, it gives us some money that the federal government, provincial governments do not give us to continue operating the airport. So it's pretty straightforward. It's consistent with provincial guidelines from our provincial guidelines request to return good farmland to the original use. So it's, now you'll see inside that the TIRAC has retained 3.1 acres, or hectares, sorry, which is approximately 7 acres, which we like to retain, and the reason for that retention is that the east-west, which is the prevailing wind, so we need that if we want to continue on, we need that airstrip, and it also has the potential of expanding to accommodate larger aircraft if need be. And as I mentioned before, the airport is only 2 of Ontario that still remain uncontrolled airspace. The other thing is that the revenues from that's going to be generated for this will be invested back in the property. So basically, like I say, it's a straightforward application. I hope I've been clear on everything, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you. Could we hear from staff, please?
Through you, Madam Chair, notice regarding this public meeting was provided in accordance with the Planning Act, and to date, no pieces of written correspondence have been received from members of the public regarding this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? I will open this to a member of the public. Yes?
Hello, Gavin Anderson, 702 Newmarket. I'm just wondering if there's anything associated with the airport use of the property that might have led to any contamination or in any other way compromise the property that would possibly involve some liability to the city if the farmer were to discover this at some future date and act on it. Thank you.
And I'll just wait till we hear if there are any other questions. I can ask you to respond, plus staff.
Yes, I can respond to that.
But not right now.
Okay.
Are there any other questions from members of the public? Seeing none, go ahead, please.
1997, the federal government approached our nonprofit corporation to transfer the said property to our nonprofit. At that point, the federal government had done all its surveying, all its tests as far as environmental and what have you, because they cannot turn the property over unless that has been done. There is no risk whatsoever to the city of Kingston. It's the return of Pittsburgh, the old Pittsburgh property. If you notice behind me probably, it cuts right in half. Front of Leeds and Lansdowne, which is now Leeds and 1,000 Islands, is on one side. Pittsburgh's on the other side. At no point was there any buildings or any possible mechanic units or whatever. That completely was on the Leeds and the 1,000 Island side. The hangar is on Leeds and the 1,000 Island side. And the other fact is that, which I've just said, the federal government, when they hand this over to us, it has to be cleared.
Thank you, very clear. Any comments, questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your presentation, and I'm going to close this public meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will now come to the regular business portion of the meeting, and I'll call this meeting to order and ask for approval of the agenda. Councillor Osanek moves, Councillor Turner seconds. All those in favor? Thank you, that carries. Confirmation of the minutes of August the 4th, moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Turner. Questions, comments? All those in favor? And that's carried, thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we do have a briefing from Mr. Newman, Manager of Policy Planning. Speak to the official plan update.
Good evening, and thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to just thank members of the committee for giving us the opportunity tonight to provide a briefing. We do have, I think, a very important comprehensive report in front of Planning Committee tonight. It deals with the 5-year update to the city's official plan, for which many people in the room here have been very engaged. And so I did want to provide an opportunity to give you an overview of some of the changes that have been made since the last time we were here around the Horseshoe back in May to talk to the official plan update. So just as a brief overview of where we've come, we started this project in 2015, the beginning of last year. Our plan was approved by the ministry in 2010, and pursuant to the Planning Act, we are required to update the plan every 5 years. So we started this project at the beginning of last year, and we've spent the past 18 months going through various iterations of the plan through both formal and informal engagement processes. Just a couple that I think are important to note. So, excuse me. We had various iterations in the early part of last year. We had a public meeting in November of last year. And then in the early part of this year, in February, we had a special meeting of council, at which time we had a conversation about the revisions that ought to be considered as part of the update to the official plan. We also hosted a series of informal opportunities for public engagement. We had family-geared events on Sundays in April, and we had a series of informal open houses to talk about different iterations of the plan. In May, we had what I'll refer to as the statutory public open house, May 4th, and the statutory public meeting, May the 19th. And I'm saying this because this open house and the public meeting in May were advertised in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act, with the content that's required in the Planning Act. An opportunity for public comment was provided at that May 19th meeting. After May 19th, I think many of you will remember there were a lot of good comments provided on the third draft of the plan. There were a lot of written submissions provided as well. So for the past 3 or 4 months, we've gone through those written submissions and we've considered the oral comments that have been received. We've had numerous meetings with special interest groups and stakeholders to really understand the issues, and we've spent time refining the content in the plan, but trying to ensure that the intent of the policies remained intact. So we've looked at refinement, revisions to the narrative, removal of duplication, and we feel we have now a very robust plan for presentation to committee for a recommendation to council. One date that's not on here is July 27th. On July 27th, we posted the 4th draft of the official plan on the city's website. That same day, we received the ministry's second round of comments through their one-window review process. So since the release of the 4th draft online, we have made some revisions to ensure that this plan is consistent with provincial interests, which is a requirement of the Planning Act. On August the 10th, we had another open house here at Memorial Hall to talk about the 4th draft of the official plan, which, as I say, was released to the web on July 27th, and there were about 15 people in attendance. So here we are tonight, presenting a comprehensive report with a recommendation to see council adopt an implementing bylaw for the official plan. I'm not going to go through all these issues, but this just gives you a snapshot of many of the issues that we've heard about through the last 18-month discussion about the official plan. As I mentioned, we received the ministry's comments on July 27th, the same day we posted the 4th draft to the web, and the ministry was asking that we ensure that our plan satisfies the changes to the Planning Act coming out of Bill 73. So we have made changes to ensure that we have alternative rates for parkland dedication, policies that speak to public consultation, and related changes that deal with the administrative process of establishing an official plan. The province is very supportive of secondary suites, and we have a policy framework right now that establishes some things that perhaps if they don't establish real constraints, they have the perception of establishing constraints, like saying any second residential unit must comply with the Ontario Building Code. It kind of goes without saying. However, the province felt that the policies were overly descriptive, and so we've refined those policies to make secondary suites easier to support. We've removed contemplation of future development areas and deferred areas outside the urban boundary because we have demonstrated we have sufficient land in the current urban boundary to accommodate a 20-year supply of growth. There were some questions throughout the process from the public about the adequacy of our ribbon of life policies. So we asked the ministry to comment specifically on these policies, and they provided some suggested language, but the content of the language is consistent with the policies that we've presented in this final draft. They had comments on the St. Lawrence Business Park expansion. They sought for us to address policies dealing with human rights and housing. Specifically, we have a policy that speaks to housing geared specifically to students and considerations that should be made for students. We've removed that policy because clearly it infringes upon human rights matters. Some minor things about significant valley lands. We didn't have a definition, so we've added a definition. Natural hazards, there was some wordsmithing there that the ministry wanted that we've added just with respect to who produces the mapping of hazards. And then there were a series of minor policy adjustments, again, to make sure that the policies of our plan are consistent with the provincial policy statement. So what's changed since May? And I use that date being the last time we were here. We've added some definitions. As I mentioned, we've refined some definitions to make sure that there's consistency throughout the plan. We've received feedback, for example, from Infrastructure Ontario wanting to use language that's consistent with their documents. So we've adopted that language within our plan. Refinement of narrative. I think one of the things that happened through the various iterations is people got to know how important this policy document is, and as a result, they wanted the document to reflect all the various projects that the city is undertaking. So we ended up with pages and pages of narrative. And so we've taken the time to try and refine the narrative, because ultimately this is a plan for helping with land use decision making as it relates to physical growth and change in the community. We don't necessarily need a long dialogue about the history of settlement in the city of Kingston. So we've tried to refine that, keeping in mind the purpose of helping with land use decision making. There were comments about the project status of the third crossing and the airport, so we've clarified policies there. And we've made revisions to address, of course, a lot of the feedback received from the public as it relates to stable areas, high-density residential policies, the ribbon of life policies, and the Rideau Canal, just to name a few. And as I mentioned, we made changes to address the ministry's comments, and of course, as a result of these changes, there are minor revisions and updates to the schedules. So I'm going to try and be brief in this briefing, but I do think there's some value in me giving members of the committee and members of the public a bit of an overview of where we have made some changes since May. So high-density residential, we've sought to clarify the intent. This is a particularly sensitive subject matter, as I think we all know. So what we've done is in the intro to this section, we've clarified that the intent of these policies is to provide some guidance for where we want high-density residential uses to go and what we want them to look like, and fundamentally we want to ensure that they're compatible with adjacent land uses and adjacent built form. So we've added a policy about built form. One of the changes to the Planning Act through Bill 73 was to say that municipal official plans shall have policies that speak to built form. So we've added policies throughout the official plan that speak to built form, including the one on the screen here. What it does is it recognizes that high-density residential doesn't always mean a high-rise building. You can have what looks like a single-family detached home containing 3 dwelling units on a really small lot, and that can be a high-density residential use by virtue of number of units divided by lot area. So we recognize that built form does not always reflect high density, and so the test in looking at proposals for new high-density residential is is the built form compatible with the built form of adjacent uses, and is it compatible with land use overall in the area? Locational criteria. I want to point out as I present this slide that in the report in front of you today, there's a synopsis of the revisions that are being proposed, and this policy, at the time of writing that report, provided that all 4 of these components, A, B, C, D, must be met in the consideration of where we want to direct high-density residential use. And we've received some feedback from the development community and from the public at large to say that these locational criteria don't always work. So we were trying to scenario test the stable area policies, for example. There are types of development that you would support in a stable area that, as I mentioned, may result in something being high-density residential. So conversion of existing dwelling into 3 or more units, all of a sudden it meets the 75 unit per net hectare ratio, and you fall into some problems with meeting these locational criteria. And what would happen is a perfectly reasonable application for rezoning to support a change in the number of units within an existing building now requires an official plan amendment because they don't meet all 4 of these locational criteria. So what we've said is these 4 criteria, being in a center or corridor, be it like the downtown or Williamsville Main Street, being in a secondary planned area like perhaps the future North Kingstown, being in a specific policy area like Williamsville, or on the periphery of one of these areas, we will consider high-density residential. We will consider high-density residential if the use is proposed in proximity to, so being within 400 meters or a walkable distance of commercial uses, of open space, community facilities, or parkland, and also if the use is proposed on an arterial or collector road. So I just want to make it clear that in the report it says must, whereas we've changed the language to a shall generally. We've added a policy that requires an urban design study whenever a new high-density residential use is proposed. However, we've also added an exemption in the policy below that says if it's an interior conversion to an existing structure and the exterior of that building's not changing, we're not going to ask for an urban design study because the impact to the urban context is non-existent. We've also kept the language flexible that if there is a situation where maybe there might be an impact, we would still have the opportunity to ask for an urban design study. So we've said it may not be required. There were some comments about the airport I wanted to touch on because we have received some information since the May meeting. So there was some concern voiced by members of the public that the modeling that we use to come up with these contour lines, which are the noise exposure forecasts around the airport, the model that the city's consultants used was the incorrect model. It was a US method of calculating noise impacts. So our consultants from WSP have confirmed, and they've had confirmation back from Transport Canada to say that their revised modeling of the NEFs is consistent with their methodology, and they have accepted the contours. So we've reflected the Transport Canada accepted contours in the official plan schedule, and we have policies that restrict residential use and other sensitive uses within specifically the 30-meter contour, which is the red contour there. And I think it's important to note that that entire contour falls within the airport lands. And lastly, just with respect to the policies I wanted to give you reference to, there were, as I mentioned, we tried to refine the duplication in the plan. So we had in Section 3 policies that spoke to the Rideau Canal. Section 3 deals with land use designations, residential, institutional, commercial, and so on. But we had policies in Section 3 that dealt with the Rideau Canal. And when you flipped further into the plan in Section 7, we found ourselves once again looking at sections dealing with the Rideau Canal. So it seemed like a fair amount of duplication there. So what we've done is we've removed the section in Section 3 that dealt with the canal. We've put it into Section 7. We've gotten rid of some of the policy duplication. And we've added what I think are some things that have made this section stronger. Specifically, we've added this 30-meter overlay along the lands abutting the high water mark of the Rideau Canal. So this overlay, which you can see in sort of brownish red there on the screen, is a 30-meter catchment area along the canal that says, if you propose any development or site alteration that's subject to a Planning Act process along the canal, you will be subject to meeting a very specific series of development criteria. So I feel as though this section of the policy has been established with a great deal of rigor that didn't exist previously. A lot of the policies I'll just mention speak to 2 factors that need to be considered, impacts to built heritage resources and the cultural heritage landscape that many members of the public have identified as being an important component of the Rideau Canal. So in conclusion, we have received a substantial amount of feedback. I think members of the committee will remember the comprehensive comment and response matrix that we put together back in looking at the 3rd draft of the plan. And we have considered every submission that we've received since, including some of the submissions that you have in front of you as part of the attachment to the package. And the comments that we received are reflected in the plan. I received from one individual a 63-page submission, and we went through every single page with a fine-tooth comb, and we've added a lot of content that relates to just making it a more readable plan. The key planning issues in the community, in our view, have been effectively addressed. The plan now conforms to the policies of the provincial policy statement, and it supports the public interest in our view as good land use planning. So next steps, trying to be brief here. You have a recommendation in front of you in the form of a comprehensive report. If that goes to council, it would be, if it's supported tonight, it would go to council for September the 20th. If council supports the implementing bylaw and gives readings to the bylaw, we would then send an application package to the ministry to start their review of our official plan update. They have 180 days to review. They could ask for an extension of 90 days. And then once they render a decision, we have an appeal period, and then we likely go to the board over certain issues that can't be resolved. So that's all I wanted to say, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, I'm wondering if we could continue with the business portion, and then when we get to the recommendation on the official plan, that's when we can do the questions and answers with our consultant and Mr. Newman. Is that agreeable to the committee? So we'll move to the business portion and do our, this first one is 40 Crescent Drive, and then we'll launch into the official plan. Okay, then I will thank you very much, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks. Business A is application for zoning bylaw amendment 40 Crescent Avenue, which we received, had a public meeting on, and there is a recommendation from staff. Do I have a mover and seconder? Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Osanek. Comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. And that carries. And application for zoning bylaw amendment 3955 Pine Grove Road, that we also had a public meeting on this evening. There is a recommendation. Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Neal. All those in favor? Thank you, and that passes. And application for zoning bylaw amendment 297 Gore Road. Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Allen. Comments, questions of staff? I will call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. And we now come to the official plan update comprehensive report. And we do have a recommendation from staff on this one. So shall we open it to the floor for questions first from the committee? And Mr. Newman and Rory, yeah. You ready? Councillor Neal, please.
That didn't give you much time to sit down, but I have first process comment, then a process question, and then a couple of specific questions, if I might. My process comment is, in 12 years a councillor, I've never seen as much kind of quantitatively as much consultation and methods of consultation, which I applaud you for. I do have a couple of process questions. When you showed your process chart all the way down, all of the first three drafts, the pattern was draft one, open house, draft one, public meeting, draft two, open house, draft two, public meeting, the same with three. And you came to draft four, which is the final draft, which had a number of substantial changes in it. And it was draft four and open house and no public meeting following that. Why the change in that pattern? And I've been asked by members of the community why there wasn't an opportunity to take what we're actually voting on to the public to give them an opportunity for final input. Perhaps you could speak to that.
Certainly, and through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I have certainly read the comments from members of the public that are concerned with the process. And so I guess the test that we used in coming up with the determination to bring this to Planning Committee as a comprehensive report and to not go back and have another public meeting is the review of the changes that have been made since the May 19th public meeting. And in our view and in the view of our legal counsel, the changes that have been made are largely administrative, refinement of narrative, as I mentioned, removal of duplication. And so we have not changed through the revisions the fundamental intent of the policies. We've strengthened the policies, we've made the intent clear, but we haven't changed the fundamental intent, which would be something that we think would then necessitate or at least validate or warrant coming back for another formal public meeting. But what I will also add is that despite the fact that we're not necessarily turning the floor open to additional public comments this evening, members of the public still have an opportunity to provide written comments before Council adopts the implementing bylaw to voice their interests as they relate to the plan that's being presented to you this evening. And in doing so, they would have appeal rights to the Ontario Municipal Board if they felt that their opportunity perhaps had been neglected or missed.
And I'll go to more specific questions. I know I commented to you some time ago when the original provision for a 400-meter allowance for high density along corridors. And I found that very, very troubling because, as I pointed out to you at the time, the Williamsville study is embraced by the community and has very specific protections for the neighborhoods surrounding the Williamsville corridor. The 400-meter recommendation appears to suggest that you'd have almost a kilometer on both sides of Princess Street in its entirety that would allow for maximum high-density development. How does that, and that doesn't seem to me to jive with the whole idea of stable neighborhoods and protecting established neighborhoods. Can you address that? Because that, for me, may be the main reason why I wouldn't be able to support the official plan.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, I just want to come back to the presentation because I had a number of backup slides in case questions like this came up. So yeah, this is the section that you're referring to that I think a number of you may recall at the public meeting on May the 19th. A number of members of the public brought up concern with this policy at the bottom. You can see where the strike-throughs are. So what it was saying was that consideration would be given to higher density within 400 meters of the boundaries of a center or a corridor. So the concern was that we just completed the Williamsville Main Street study. It provided very clear expectations regarding how that area is to be built out. And here we are providing a policy that says 400 meters north and south of the boundaries of that area, we might consider higher density residential use. So we recognized that and we decided that we would take that 400 meter number out because you're right, it essentially triples the width of the area where we're trying to direct intensification. And we've said that moderate increases in density will be permitted adjacent to, so immediately adjacent to, centers of corridors so as to accommodate a transition in density from areas intended to support high density residential to those supporting low and medium densities. So we've removed the 400, we've said immediately adjacent to, and again, we've clarified the policy intent. It's to support a transition in density.
Okay, I guess perhaps I misread your earlier presentation when it was up there. 1,400 pages in 2 days is a lot to digest. My concern is that we don't end up going to the OMB to protect a decision or to fight a decision that has pitted this allowance for greater density corridor against our stable neighborhoods policy. And I know we spoke about stable neighborhoods right from the very beginning. And one of the stated goals of the OMB review was to clarify and strengthen our protection of stable neighborhoods. Can you speak to my concern that this seems to be like the old progressive conservative, something going in two different directions at the same time? Perhaps you can speak to that.
Sure, and thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair. So I do have a series of slides that speak to stable areas conveniently, so I will take a second and go through them for you, and I think it'll help clarify the concern. So one of the challenges that we had when we started this project was a lot of the members of the public and I think members of staff and the development community alike were concerned that there wasn't a lot of clarity with respect to where we were trying to direct intensification and change. And so we've identified through changes to the policy language that housing districts, which are shown on Schedule 2 to the plan, which are shown here as the yellow areas, so the centers and corridors are the orange, the blue are employment areas, the green environmental protection areas, institutional and pink, and then the yellow, as I say, are the housing districts. So we set the expectation that housing districts shown in yellow are intended to remain stable. So that establishes some expectation that when you get into the stable area policies in 2.6, we are primarily working within housing districts. So when we have applications in housing districts, we're probably going to refer to 2.6 and go through the policy tests that are established here. So what these have in 2.6, it has under 2.6.2, it defines the characteristics that make up a stable area. Because one of the things we acknowledge in the introduction here, and I won't go through it word by word, but it says portions of housing districts are characteristic of a stable area, but portions are undergoing fundamental change. So if you think of North Kingstown, where the southern end is probably characteristic of a stable neighborhood, it's got a very well, albeit irregular lot configuration, it's very well established, but there are large sites like the former tannery site that has potential for change. And so what we're saying here is that if you are within a stable area, so if we look at the characteristics and we say, yes, this is an application in a stable area, then we have to satisfy a series of policy tests. And again, I won't go through these in detail, but these tests are, is the proposal one of 4 types of intensification? Is it infill? So is it just sort of an extra large lot where you're severing it and you're putting a single-family detached home in between 2 existing single-family detached homes, and the scale and massing of everything is consistent with and is compatible with the built-out area? That's permitted under the first one there. If it's a second residential unit in someone's basement, that's also considered an appropriate form of intensification in a stable area. The third is if you're converting within the existing building, 1 unit into 2 or 3, for example, that may also be contemplated and supported, provided you demonstrate that the change is compatible. And this is something I think is important to note, because we've built a lot of cross-references in the plan to 2.7, which are the compatibility policies. And as planners, this is fundamental to what we do, is look at land use compatibility. And then the last is more related to your question, I think. It's intensification that requires a zoning bylaw amendment or minor variance and supportive factors that might affect the intensity of use. So if we have an application for a massive addition off the back of someone's home in the context of what we've defined as a stable area, we might consider that application, provided it satisfies the 4 bullet points which are difficult to read there. It has to complement existing uses in the area. So again, thinking of the locational criteria for high density, close to parks, commercial uses, open space, community facilities. So it's a complementary use. It might support a transition in density and built form. So if you're on the periphery of or adjacent to a center or a corridor, but that opposite the center or corridor, you've said that's really a stable area. Well, you might consider a transition in density, again, under the context of these policies. If the proposal will support active transportation and public transit, so it's within, let's say, walking distance of a public bus stop, and it's compatible with existing development, taking into account, again, the compatibility policies of Section 2.7. So the point is that we've established, I think, a very rigorous and robust policy framework for reviewing applications that may find themselves in what we define as a stable area. And sorry, just one last thing, just because it's important, I think. This section goes on to say that if you're not proposing something that falls within one of these 4 categories, you need an official plan amendment. And you need a planning rationale that addresses one of 15 or so items. And if you don't address all of those items, we may defer consideration of the application and do a secondary plan or a special area plan. So there's a very specific step-by-step process here, and I think it protects the public interest.
One of the goals I know that was established early that I applauded in this process was that both private planners, when they brought proposals forward, and sometimes city planners, were kind of loose in their using the expression neighborhood in transition. And it was my understanding that we were going to, and I believe we have, but you can clarify this, we've established a much stricter criteria, and the position will be it's a stable neighborhood unless you can prove that you've met this other criteria. Am I accurate in that assessment of that kind of tension between neighborhoods in transition and stable neighborhoods?
Yes, you're correct with respect to there being tension there, and we have removed the areas in transition policies. It was one of the first things that was done. Because of the challenges, you're always trying to argue that you're in transition, and those that disagreed were arguing that you were in a stable area. So what we've said is there's no such thing as an area in transition. Either you're in a stable area or you're not. And so we have the characteristics that define a stable area, and those characteristics, the case in that discussion now needs to be that you're either characteristic of a stable area or you're not. But I think by recognizing that housing districts which are mapped are intended to be stable, and by virtue of some cross-references made that we're now calling housing districts stable, and we're recognizing certain locations where we would support change, I think the clarity has been added.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Councillor McLaren?
Thank you. And if I may just go through a short checklist of things that we're going to be recommending here, including its compliance with the official or with the Planning Act, and reference to Section 26 when we're updating the official plan.
Could I ask you to just a little closer to the microphone, please?
Better? Just to consider the Part B of Section 26.1 of the Planning Act, have regard to the matters of provincial interest listed in Section 2. And there's a nice long list in Section 2. And I'm just wondering if the provincial interest is going to make things easier, harder. Like, what are their comments with regards to some of these issues, if that's okay with you?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair. So as I mentioned, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs they're the approval authority for an update to a city's official plan. And so when the Planning Act refers to matters of provincial interest, they refer to those matters that we have been discussing with the ministry through their one-window review process. So that one-window review process is ultimately where the Ministry of Municipal Affairs consults with all the other Ontario ministries to provide feedback to the City of Kingston with respect to how our policies align with matters of provincial interest. So, as I mentioned, we received the second round of comments from the ministry in July, and I have to admit that the changes that were required to satisfy the comments that they made were extremely minor. So we have a plan now that is consistent with matters of provincial interest as demonstrated through the one-window process.
Okay, so with regards to, for example, the first one, protection of ecological systems, and compared to the previous official plan, are things like the ribbon of life and protection of trees and forests more rigorous, less rigorous, or about the same compared to the existing official plan?
That's a good question. I would say that they are now in better alignment with provincial policy. For example, as I mentioned, we didn't have a policy that spoke to what a significant valley land was. So it's tough to implement a policy if you don't really know what you're dealing with. So we've added a definition of a significant valley land, a definition, in fact, that's not provided in the provincial policy statement, but we validated against provincial natural heritage reference manual. So I do think that by bringing the 2010 plan into alignment with the 2014 provincial policy statement, we do have a more robust plan that has greater protection for things like the environment that the province has identified an interest in.
And that's the ribbon of life as well?
The ribbon of life is unique to Kingston and several other municipalities in Ontario. So as it relates to development within 30 meters of the high water mark of a water body, not every municipality has that. I guess you could say that's something that we've done that goes beyond what the province expects.
Okay. And with regards to Part D, the conservation of features of significant architectural, cultural, and historical interest, how well are we protecting heritage versus a previous plan?
What I will say is that heritage, cultural heritage resources, a defined term in the plan, reference to cultural heritage resources as being something that needs to be considered upon review of a development application. There have been additional references to the situations under which you would give consideration for cultural heritage resources. So I would say we have brought it more to the forefront of decision-making in this iteration of the plan.
Thank you. And with regards to H, the safe and healthy communities, and I had talked earlier with you guys at the very beginning of the term about the possibility of a health impact study on land use planning. May I ask, has anything been done as a result of that?
I may defer to Rory Batch, who's from Dillon and is part of our consulting team, but what I will say on the matter of health and healthy communities, a lot of what we've done in terms of trying to support a mix of uses and bringing opportunities for sort of the live, work, play dynamic into closer proximity of one another does support provincial interests in building healthy, what they call livable communities. The other thing is that we did have fairly good consultation with the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee, and they provided quite a detailed list of recommended changes to see in the plan, and we've made a number of changes as a result of that feedback to give more consideration to removing barriers and supporting enhanced accessibility.
Okay.
If you want to add anything.
Two other aspects with regards to healthy communities that are high priority for Ontarians is active transportation. That's opportunities for walking, cycling, skateboarding, all of those, and that specific terminology is considered in this plan and used throughout consistently. Active transportation is mentioned in virtually every section of the plan and is now a consideration with identified for development moving forward, either if the city's doing a secondary plan exercise at that kind of large scale, big picture exercise, or right down to individual developments. There's policies that talk about that being very important to healthy Ontarians. And throughout the plan, in as early as the first updated version, there were a number of policies added around community gardens and healthy food type matters, which again is a high priority for Ontarians.
Excellent. And with regards to affordable housing and some of the concerns that people have had about how difficult it is to get it into buildings and spreading it around and all that kind of stuff, in your opinion, have the provisions for affordable housing become better for the people who may need affordable housing or not?
Right. Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, it's a heavy document, so I'm just trying to remember if we made changes to section 3311, I believe, that speaks to affordable housing, and we've added at the request of the province recognition of affordable housing targets. So that's one change that's been made as it relates to affordable housing. Affordable housing is a difficult subject matter, and I think a lot of us are anxious to know when the province is going to make changes to the Planning Act to require inclusionary zoning, which would allow us some more, I guess, legislative rigor to require affordable housing supply. At this point, our official plan, and I made this comment on May the 19th, we have throughout our plan very clearly identified targets, but they are targets. They are things we're striving to achieve. They're not things that we have the legislative mandate to be able to require.
Okay. And under L, the protection of the financial and economic well-being of our municipality. This is one very close and dear to my heart. I'm wondering what is new in the plan to help us be more financially sustainable?
Right, well, there are a number of things that I could probably say to respond to the question, I guess, just in the sense that organized land use planning helps to prevent against inefficiencies in land use. So if we haphazardly expanded the urban boundary, then we would support inefficient use of public infrastructure. However, we have added very explicit references in, I think, section 214 to factors that would need to be considered in review of development files. So I don't know if you have the section handy there, or you might want to speak to it.
Yeah, there was 3 specific bullets added in regards to the matter of financial sustainability. So there's a policy that speaks to development generating the necessary tax revenue in order to support that financial sustainability component. And there was a policy also added in regards to when area planning studies are being done to consider that those areas are also being considered from a financial sustainability perspective, and that the growth pays for itself and does not place a burden on the city of Kingston.
Outstanding. And N, the resolution of planning conflicts involving public and private interests. What has changed there?
So, as I mentioned in the second round of comments from the ministry, we were asked to ensure we had policies that satisfied some of the changes that were made to the Planning Act through Bill 73, and one of the changes was to require policies that spoke to alternative processes for public engagement. So we've added at this time the enabling policies to support changes to the way that we review Planning Act applications in Kingston. But I think as you know, we're still undertaking a peer review of best practices in Ontario and elsewhere to see how we compare in terms of the way we engage the public. So we have enabling policies. We've added them in this last iteration to allow us to change the way that we consult once we've done our research.
Wonderful. And Councillor Neal asked my last question, so thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Osanek.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much for doing the track changes with the different color coding. That made it so much easier. I know the public really appreciates that, and hopefully we can do that again in 5 more years when we do the next update. And thanks. I also liked how in section 2.8.2, forest coverage, you added the 30, how we strive to have 30% forest coverage, and also how council's been working on trying to increase our tree canopy. So thanks for adding that part in there. My last question is, or comment is, just about the ribbon of life. So that wording is blue, so that means all that wording is new. It's all been edited and new. So M&R has, through that one window review, it's looked at that wording and it's fine with it in this draft. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that is not correct. So we sent to the province the 3rd draft back in April or May, and that is what generated the province's 2nd round of technical comments. That being said, I did provide, actually you would have to check my email correspondence, because I did provide to Damien Schaefer, who's the planner on our file, a working copy of where we were going with our ribbon of life policies. So I'm not sure if the province commented specifically on the policies we had drafted that show the blue text, but what I will say is the blue text ultimately establishes additional rigor that wasn't there before, in the sense that, and you're likely obviously very familiar with the section, but it says, before we had a policy that said any development within 30 meters of the water would require an official plan amendment. And there were a lot of scenarios that you could play that, like let's say someone proposing to be at 28 meters from the water, where all of a sudden we're requiring an official plan amendment for something that perhaps all of us think is perfectly reasonable. So what we've tried to do with the ribbon of life policies is really clarify the policy intent. So the intent of 30 meters separation between development and the water is protection of water quality, plant and animal habitat. One of the things that we did add after the open house on August the 10th was recognition of the value that the ribbon of life offers for wildlife corridors and connectivity. So we've added clarity in the policy intent, and we've established 2 scenarios under which we would require an official plan amendment. So if you're proposing development on a lot, or sorry, I should say we've established 2 exemptions from the ribbon of life 30-meter setback. The exemption is if you have an existing lot of record and you've got a building on that lot, and you're proposing to expand the building, we would allow you to expand that building if it exists within 30 meters, provided the expansion doesn't further reduce the water setback deficiency. The second thing is if you have an existing lot of record that's undeveloped, but there's simply nowhere on that lot that you could feasibly build anything in any sort of private servicing in the rural context at the 30 meters, we would consider a zoning bylaw amendment from a 30-meter water setback without an official plan amendment, subject to demonstrating through an environmental impact assessment that the intent of the policy is being upheld. So, although the ministry hasn't looked at that language specifically, the comments that they provided through their review of whatever iteration of the policies that we provided do not conflict with where we've ended up and what's being recommended tonight.
Thank you. And just to go on about the one comment for the ribbon of life, where you said that M&R doesn't require ribbon of life in all of the official plans across the province. And I just found that interesting because in 2009, when we were looking at the 2010 official plan, it was M&R that said we had to add ribbon of life. So I find that interesting that M&R is not consistent across the entire province. But for the other municipalities, this might be the question for our consultant because he might know what other municipalities actually have a ribbon of life mention. Do we know which ones, like one or two, that do, which since ours does?
It's very rare in Ontario, actually. Greg suggested to me that perhaps the township of Rideau Lakes has it, and that's a municipality that sees more cottage development than anything these days, and so they're interested in kind of protecting the shoreline around the cottages and keep maintaining a naturalized shoreline. So they have their objective ultimately is different. It's grounded from that perspective, whereas Kingston's approach with the ribbon of life kind of ties back to a strong desire for environmental sustainability that is the populist philosophy in this community, and that's ultimately how the ribbon of life finds its way into the policy framework of the official plan. It reaches out and kind of makes that connection to this community and what they care about for the future. So as I said, it doesn't exist in a lot of other municipalities because Kingston has taken a step beyond the provincial minimum, and most municipalities don't do that, especially municipalities, for example, in the Greater Toronto area where they know that a developer can quite easily challenge that and they don't have the backing of the province to fall on because they've gone beyond provincial minimums. Whereas Kingston made a decision back in 2010 that it wanted to support the environment, the community cared about the environment, the province had expressed some support for that, and ultimately the ribbon of life found its way into the 2010 official plan.
Councillor Turner, I'll just keep. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for this report. You've worked very hard, all of you that have been involved with this, and I appreciate all your work. It was lengthy to read, a lot of reading. Thank you, though. I have a question about the business district. In terms of Norman Rogers Airport, thank you for taking out very limited retail service commercial uses. And in terms of the airport recognized as a business district, does that include airport in terms of hotel accommodation? Would you be able to put a hotel out there under that designation, or would it have to be amended?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. As I say, I haven't got it memorized yet myself either. There are a number of land uses that we would seek to support, and the land uses that we're seeking to support in relation to the airport are those that support the operation and function of the airport. So we do have reference to a number of uses in Section 3.7 that acknowledge the need to support the sustainability, financial and operational sustainability of the airport. And where the rubber hits the road there is what we would actually permit within those broad categories. What we would permit in the implementing zoning bylaw is the land uses that are allowed within the airport zone. So I'm not sure if a hotel is explicitly permitted in the implementing zoning bylaw, but within the official plan, there are uses at a high enough level that would support an airport being, or a hotel being put into the implementing zoning bylaw. So it's not explicitly identified, but it could be argued that it can fall within the categories that we do permit within the airport designation.
Okay, all right, thank you. And thank you for also putting in the noise contour study. I appreciate that as well. In terms of the Queen students, you were mentioning something earlier about the change in the recommendation. Could you explain that a little further, please?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair. The policy in red there at the top is a policy that we removed. This is, I think, what was the policy of the most concern to the province. It essentially says that students have specific land use characteristics.
Right.
And so we have removed that because that's very much a human rights matter just waiting to happen. So.
But it still protects them and allows them to have density and intensification and everything else, because I noticed that it's in future planning areas, so.
We just don't recognize students as being any different,
Okay.
and that's what this policy was doing.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hopefully won't be too long. My questions are sort of concerned with development outside the urban boundary, or what protections we have now implemented to maintain the urban boundary. So the two questions are, first, what protections do we have to maintain the urban boundary so that sprawl outside that, I guess, would be more difficult to achieve and in terms of moving forward. And what have we done to sort of encourage more sustainable development in rural areas through policy changes? The last plan, we've had challenges with estate residential. I think the intent was to limit the ability for that, and so I want to understand where we're going with that.
Sure, and thank you through Madam Chair. So, I mean, in terms of how we protect the urban boundary and ensure that it remains where it is, at least until it's justified that it needs to change, is really the fundamentals that we use to support the assignment and the allocation of residential lands in the city. So leading up to this official plan in 2013, we did a population projection study to look at how the city of Kingston was going to grow over the next 20 years. We then look at the average household size, and we say that if the population is going to grow by 18,000 people, we probably need about 9,000 homes. And so we continuously look at the number of homes that are being added to the market every year and the absorption of those homes through the issuance of building permits. And so we juxtapose that against the forecasts and population change, and we start to get a sense of whether or not what we have in that urban boundary is sufficient to cover what we anticipate the demand to be. So the pending and committed study that we've presented to Planning Committee a number of months ago helps us to ensure that the policy framework we have today is appropriate. So until such time as we identify that, holy, we're going to run out of land within the urban boundary, we should contemplate in the next iteration of the update to the plan, expanding the boundary one way or the other. We just don't change it. So that's where we are right now, is we've done that analysis to say we have a sufficient supply of land within the boundary today to satisfy provincial interests. And as it relates to the rural versus urban context, the province, through the provincial policy statement, says the focus of growth shall be the urban settlement areas or settlement areas, which in a serviced context means the urban boundary, and limited growth shall occur in the rural area. So they've never defined limited, but we recognize that the focus of growth shall be the urban area. So that's how we ensure that, or that's how we consider at least changes to the urban boundary. And this iteration of the plan is justified that there's no reason to extend it or expand it. As it relates to the other matter, I'll just speak to the rural state lot comment, and then perhaps Rory can jump in on some of the policy changes. So as I think members of the Planning Committee know, we are undertaking a review of the rural state lot policies. We were waiting until the Waterfront Master Plan was done because the direction coming out of the consultant's report about a year or so ago was that if you're going to do rural state lot subdivisions, they should be tied to a recreational resource like the waterfront. So we have in Schedule 13 just show you here. The areas shown in red outside of the inner part of the city are areas that the consultant doing the rural estate lot initial review concluded these areas have potential for some form of resource-based rural development. And so our task right now is to sort of take that work and see it evolve into official plan policies. And so what we'll be doing is over the next year, we'll be doing a peer review of not only the work that's been done, but we'll also be looking at the work or the policies of our neighboring municipalities and municipalities even as far southwest as Windsor and Essex County. You know, we're trying to get a broad spectrum of what other municipalities are doing in a rural context to see how we align. And so once that work is done, we'll be advancing an official plan amendment separate from this official plan update to make sure our policies are in keeping with those of our neighbors.
Great. I have one comment and one question, and then I will for you. I want to echo the comments about the sort of amount of engagement and consultation. You know, there's been a lot of ways to interact with you and your team in terms of this over the course, both in person, by email, and by writing the city. And it's really great to see that. What I really appreciate also is the comment matrix that was associated with this. It was a great way to see all the comments, no matter what interest they might have or what question they have, in a very transparent way. And so I think that was fantastic. I've seen one other one elsewhere. And so for the next update, you may want to put group the comments by the sections they apply to, because then we can sort of see the differing perspectives side by side that are being made in terms of those comments. And it would be helpful when we're having a conversation about what the appropriateness of the policy or the balancing of different kinds of use that we're looking for. My next question is about when you last spoke to the planning committee, we talked about, or maybe it was a special council meeting, I think. We talked about the relationship between the zoning bylaw amendment, the comprehensive zoning bylaw, and this plan. And there was some concern at that meeting that we were loosening the plan and its authority while we still didn't have a prescriptive zoning bylaw, comprehensive zoning bylaw to move forward. I'm wondering if you could just comment on where all of that kind of fits together at this point.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. So as you may know, we have started the process of consolidating the 5 existing zoning bylaws. Today, in fact, we have the first sort of iteration of a complete first draft internal, and we are critically looking at it as a group with respect to the various discipline areas. So yeah, we are getting close to being able to release the first draft of the zoning bylaw. And the relationship between an official plan and a zoning bylaw is intended to implement the policies of the official plan. So I mentioned the ribbon of life is a very good example, where we're saying a ribbon of life is an area within 30 meters of the water. So what we want to do is implement a 30-meter water setback so that any relief from that hardened setback, which is enforceable through the zoning bylaw, requires a zoning bylaw amendment. The test under the Planning Act when you review a zoning amendment is, does it conform to the policies of the official plan? So what we've done is, as I mentioned, one of the objectives of this update has been to clarify the policy intent. Because there's no point in doing a zoning amendment if you don't really know what the test is against the policies of the official plan. So we've really tried to clarify the intent. And the next step is now taking all those areas of the plan that have specific policy intent and trying to translate that into measurable zoning standards like yard setbacks and height and coverage and that sort of thing. So we are working underway, and as I say, I believe the goal is to try and release the first draft to the public in the fall of this year.
So just to follow up, I just want to make sure I got that right. I think it's clear, but so some of the stronger policies that we've spoken about tonight will be implemented in very prescriptive forms through the zoning bylaw in order to further protect and create standards that we're implementing these policies with. Did I get that right? You don't have to explain if I got it right.
That's correct.
All right, great. That's all for me.
Thank you. Councillor Neal.
Just one forgotten question and one question that came out of the discussion here. First, around the whole issue of the human rights, and I support that notion that we're building for land use, we're not building for students. But I will say developers use the euphemism purpose-built when they're requesting approvals for 5 and 6 bedroom units, because those aren't, I mean, those clearly are not at $700 a bedroom, are not being built for families. And I know that we have a policy of attempting to get more mixed use units, but how can we protect against that euphemism of purpose-built, which is indeed student housing, from creeping into our planning process? I'm not sure that's an official plan question, but if you can address it, that would be great.
I guess the response I'll provide through you, Madam Chair, is that we are trying to establish standards that will apply to anyone that benefit everyone. So an example of that is where we've just done the amenity area study review, I think 2 years ago or last year, where we were saying that a certain amount of amenity space should be provided on the basis of on a per unit basis for the benefit of the users of the building overall. So that's, I mean, fundamental to what we're trying to do is just create good spaces for whoever occupies that space. So unless, Rory, you have something you want to add, we really don't make the distinction anywhere. And we don't really have the control, the ability to control the number of bedrooms in a unit. It's a limitation in the Planning Act.
Yeah, I'll just add one point. This was something that was raised earlier. I'm happy to say that there is a new policy in the official plan that makes reference to the subject. So in and around the same area of sustainability where we added policies around new development being financially sustainable and generating tax revenue, in that same section, you'll also find a policy that indicates that the city is aiming to see development that meets the demographic and socioeconomic needs of the city of Kingston. And what that means is we're not designing and building housing for tomorrow's, like next week's needs, but we're designing and building housing that provides appropriate forms of housing for the long-term needs of the community. And that is intended to kind of speak to the nature of what is purpose-built housing versus what is housing that has a longer-term intention, which is to serve the ongoing growth and prosperity and development of Kingston, and fits into the city. In 100 years from now, you'd be able to look back at the development that happened next year, guided by that policy, and say, yeah, that fits with this community. That's part of our fabric, and it's right. There's a simple policy in there that is intended to help achieve a lot of things.
And my final question, I know that the official plan is a living document, and it can evolve even after it's received. And I appreciate that. And the comprehensive zoning bylaw, I presume, may indeed lead to an amendment or two of the official plan, because we come up with something that isn't clearly defined within the official plan. Is that accurate?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
Good, because one of, and this comes out of our next discussion. I know that I believe it was the ERA peer review talked about floor plan best practices in other communities, saying above 6 stories shouldn't be any greater than 750 square meters. I believe Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver have that as a policy. And it was suggested as a possibility in the peer review that was done. is this something that we may consider within the context of the comprehensive zoning bylaw and might indeed lead to a possibility of an official plan amendment to address floor plates in taller buildings?
So through you, Madam Chair, I guess I would say at this point, the floor is open for discussion on what we want to consider in the context of the zoning bylaw. We're just starting the process of creating a new plan or new bylaw for the city of Kingston. So I think things like your references to what they're doing in Toronto are things we ought to give consideration to. If it makes sense to put a policy in the official plan that relates to specific zoning parameters, then we'll also look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just see if Councillor Hutchison had questions. Welcome. Councillor Osanek.
Thanks, Madam Chair. When we were talking about the airport, that just made me realize that we added the new wording of 3.7.7B, and that's the complementary commercial uses for the airport, such as restaurants, a bank, medical facility, or convenience. And so I'm just wondering, why did we add that when we just had the update to our commercial inventory, which did not include the airport? And the conclusion of that study that came to this planning committee was that we have enough commercial for the next 40 years. So I just see this, and because of just this one item, I don't think I can support, when it comes to council, right, these recommendations, because I don't believe that, right? Like at the airport, we have Front Road, you know, we have Front Road and Days Road, we have Bath Road, and or is this just intended for some commercial uses within the brand new terminal that we're building, like the new airport? But this does say business park, which means the outskirts of the airport itself.
Sure. I'll be happy to answer that question on behalf of Greg, through the chair. If you look at the Schedule 3, which is the land use designation map for the official plan, you'll notice that the airport lands proper are in an airport designation, and land that is owned by the city, by the airport, that is not part of the airport is designated as business park, and that's a change in this official plan. And the reason that was done was to create the differentiation between what is effectively airport lands and on-airport type land uses versus business park type land uses that are complementary to an airport. On the airport lands itself, the policy that you've identified talks about development on the airport, and it is those like a restaurant or a convenience store or those types of things that you would see within an airport terminal building. And that's okay in the context of the city's bigger commercial study. Because if you think about it, no one really wakes up in the morning and decides that I'm going to drive to the airport to get a loaf of bread. So that kind of overall dynamic in terms of the commercial hierarchy is separate, because the airport, the commercial within the airport kind of serves the transiting of the passengers through that particular facility. And so it's unique in its own right. The business district component allows for complementary business type uses. So for example, the hotel that you asked about earlier has a home in that land abutting the airport, and a hotel could be developed there. And so there's opportunity for those types of employment-related uses that do good things, create jobs, and generate tax revenue to coexist alongside the airport on lands that are owned by the authority, but not technically part of the official airport lands themselves. So that was made clear in this version of the official plan because it was a little bit muddy in the previous version, and it was done on purpose to make sure that there wasn't any crossover in terms of what needed to be interpreted. And I personally think, because it was my recommendation, that that's an improvement from the current official plan that we have.
What my big concern is that a lot of I really like the ambience of our airport as you drive down along Bay Ridge Drive to Old Front Road. It's really charming, right? You have the golf course and the trees along Bay Ridge Drive, and then you have the airport. I don't want to lose that ambience by now suddenly having what's going to be a commercial strip mall. Like, yes, our ideal is a business park with like good employment jobs, but what we often see is that those business parks get carved away with a whole bunch of retail and maybe 1 or 2 businesses. And I know we have new stuff that says a maximum of 25% of all the lands in our business parks, you know, dedicated to retail. The rest have to actually be businesses, you know, with employment jobs in there. I just don't want that entire airport area turned into a strip mall, and I just don't like seeing that in there because that's opening the door, I think, to just developing Bay Ridge Drive and Old Front Road into more commercial areas. And it's like the airport's right next to the water, and you just lose all that ambience of the lands that are there right now. And I know that best land use study will be coming forward this fall to EIT committee, but I think now that best land use study, when it does come to council and to committee in the fall, they're just going to be referring back to, well, council just approved 3.77B, and so that will just make a fait accompli of having a commercial strip mall next to the airport. That's my concern.
Yeah, I would say if put to me, or perhaps even Greg, if we'd say in the writing of that policy and in our reading of it, was that the intent of that policy, was to create a commercial strip mall on the airport? That's not the intent. It's the intent that I described is if you are moving through the airport because you're either getting off a flight or you're getting to a flight, there's more than just the fact that you need a bathroom and you have to check in. There's usually sometimes you need to get a snack and you have to, maybe you need dinner, or maybe there's something that you need to purchase. So that's why we need to have an opportunity to develop a convenience store and a restaurant and those things as part of the airport building itself. That's the synergy, right? It's part of the airport development. You're there, you're moving through the airport facility, you've parked your car, and it's part of the nexus that is the facility itself, and it allows those other things to be developed. That is really the intent of that policy, just to make it clear that the City of Kingston's airport in the passage of time is not just a place to catch a flight, but it's a place to be able to do the other things that you may need to do while you're at an airport. For example, have a meal, or potentially, again, as we see at other airports, there's like sometimes a counter where you can get like Tylenol, right? Or you need a neck pillow. It's those types of complementary activities that help the sustainability of the airport, because there's amenities at that airport. It makes it a functional facility. That's how airports are getting planned these days, as not just a place where you catch a flight, but a place that offers various amenities as a traveler.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the committee? Then I would like to see if we can put the recommendation on the floor. We do have a recommendation from staff. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Allen. We've had a couple of rounds of questions. Are we ready for the vote? I would like to call the vote. All those in favor? And that carries. And thank you, gentlemen, very much for all your work and your excellent answers. I've had a request for a 3-minute recess. So I'll call a 3-minute recess. We'll get back at 8:45. Thank you. Oh, is it? Oh, whatever it is.
8:45 by 8:39 by mine.
Oh, okay. 8:39, whichever. 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah. You said 3? Yeah, 3? Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you, everyone. I would like to now move on to our item E of our business portion of the meeting. It's the application for zoning bylaw amendment and proposed amendment to the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan, 223 Princess Street. We have a number of that clauses in our package, a recommendation, and under normal circumstances, which this might well be, we will entertain questions from the committee and then put the recommendation on the floor, or the other way around. With the Councillor Neal.
Yes, just quickly so I don't forget later, I sent you an email requesting a separation of the recommendation clauses. I'm going to talk very briefly about the community benefit plan, and then I'm going to remind all of my colleagues on at the table that clearly we are not supposed to consider the aspects of the community benefit plan when we're making our land use planning decision. That has to be based solely on the merits of the proposal. First, a bit of a process question. I know that there was a question from Councillor Schell to staff requesting information regarding the public consultation for the community benefit plan that is being proposed. And I know that there was an email that response to that from the co-chair of the Williamsville Association that we've all received, pointing out that although they were listed along with another community association as having been consulted, indeed, they had received an email, a personal email, but they didn't feel, I know neither of them felt consulted. So I just would strongly suggest that we follow our own guidelines for public consultation in all future community benefit plans, which would mean a public process, public meeting with an invitation to a broad invitation to the community. So with that aside, I will say some of the things I'm about to say will end up annoying everybody, but that's what happens when you have a tough job like this. First of all, community benefits, I think, totally separated from the planning approval process. I agree with that concept. For the last 5 years, we have allowed substantive density and not so much height, but density approvals with no consideration for how it might positively, how we might be able to square that peg by allowing for some consideration for community benefit. And so I agree with the concept of community benefit. The elephant in the room is when it comes to making the decision on the planning merits, we've all been told what the community benefit is. We've all been lobbied by the community that wants that community benefit and to approve the process. And so it is a kind of awkward situation. And that's why I've asked that the vote be separated so that we have an opportunity to vote on the concept of community benefit, on the concept of brownfield remediation, which I totally support, but also totally separated from those two commitments. We're able to vote for the proposal solely on the merits of the planning rationale. And so I just wanted to make that clear. A couple of things. I know that we often hear from planners and from staff that every proposal that comes before us is site-specific. And I've always had trouble with the idea that we aren't setting precedents in our decisions because everything is site-specific. I will say that the ERA peer review, which I thought was a very good document, in fact says, as such, the proposal displays a height and building mass that may become a precedent for the city of Kingston. So I know we try to avoid that word precedent when we're talking about a development, but indeed, these urban planners that did our review recognized that there is a risk of precedent setting. And they've also said, and some of the things I applaud with the proposal. I understand that we are going to get restoration of the Princess Street facade and the marquee and restored to a 1920s heritage Art Deco rendering. And I think that's a positive thing. Whatever went in that site, that would be a positive thing. But the peer reviewers go on to say the question of compatibility as it relates to scale, building mass, and height remains a key concern. And in the official plan, compatible is defined in part as development coexisting in harmony and being evaluated by measurable objective standards based on criteria such as aesthetics. So clearly there were some reservations regarding this development. I know, and I'm going to ask some specific questions of staff now, I know that that there were issues regarding some mediating effort to address some of the concerns within the peer review. One was setbacks from Queen Street, which was originally, I believe, 0 or very minimal setbacks. Could I ask the staff, because I know that the peer reviewer talks about allowing perhaps a 45-degree setback. What is the setback that indeed is achieved with the proposal in front of us? I did give a heads up to the planner that I'd be asking that question, if I might.
Through you, Madam Chair, the proposed angular plane for this development is at 82 degrees. Yes. Since the issuance of the second peer review document, there has been some close work done between staff and the applicant to come up with some additional mitigation strategies applied throughout the Queen Street facade to address potential adverse impacts. The setback from the podium of the Queen Street facade was increased to 3 meters, which does provide an opportunity for terracing at that level for the residential units that front on to Queen Street at that level of the building. There have been significant improvements to the Queen Street podium as well. And then going up further onto the tower, there are additional 3-meter setbacks at the corners that have been established to reduce the amount of volume of the mass there. Those elements don't ultimately have an impact on the angular plane measurement of 82 degrees, but they do assist in providing mitigation to the potential impacts on the Queen Street facade. In addition to that, the extent of glazing increases as you move up the tower. And again, that's another measure or feature that's been incorporated to draw the eye down to the Queen Street podium and make that street wall the most prominent feature experienced by the pedestrian.
Yes, I believe.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Just to add to that, another element that was changed was the first thing I'd just like to clarify is that the peer review document that you're referencing was written based on the 18-story building that was provided at the second meeting. So the building height was also reduced in response to that. In addition to that, the rooftop mechanical, which was previously aligned along Queen Street, was moved to the center of the building to reduce the impact of massing and visibility of the mechanical on the rooftop. So it's more oriented towards the center of the building as well.
I'm not contesting that there hasn't been a lot of work put into this file, that they recognized the criticisms of the peer reviews. I'm just unsure. Actually, I'm sure that they didn't address them to the degree that they should have been addressed. And that's my primary concern. I did speak earlier about the potential for a floor plate limitation when we're considering any height above 6 stories. And that seems to be something that's done in best practices in other communities. Now, it's not part of our current or proposed official plans. So I know that that's just a kind of wish list, but I would like to let staff know that it's on my wish list, that I would like to see some consideration of best practices, floor plates for taller buildings that other communities are applying. Yeah, I will not be supporting this project because as much as I'd like to support the concept of community benefit, the concept of recognizing that both staff and the developer have come some way in trying to mitigate what would have been, in my mind, at 17, 18, or 20 stories, a monstrosity on this site, in my mind, haven't gone far enough to mitigate the visual impact that 15 stories will have on that stretch of Princess Street. So I won't be able to support this project. Thank you.
Thank you. I think if we're going to do questions and statements, perhaps we should get the recommendation on the floor then. I know, but we should put it on the floor. Oh, sorry. Did someone wish to speak?
Point of order, just
Yes.
if we put it on the floor, will Councillor Hutchison be able to speak to it?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like him to. Well, we could do it now. Did you want to ask some questions, Councillor Hutchison of staff?
Questions he can, but once we put it on the floor.
Yes, if we keep to the questions.
So that's
Yes,
what
let's
that's
keep
what
to
I would
questions,
recommend.
and then we'll,
that you
when
keep
we
to
get to
your
recommendation
procedure.
statements. Okay, we'll continue with questions with the committee. Do we have some questions about Councillor Allen?
I'll just sort of add to the questions. In general, I'm fairly supportive of this project, but the challenge for me is sort of the massing and how that context happens in Kingston. And so I guess what I'd be interested in, and I had some conversation with staff leading up to this about how the sort of massing larger floor plate was decided to work in the context in Kingston as part of the mitigation strategies when what we were sort of referred to was larger buildings with towers that were skinnier floor plates to lessen the impact of the visual, so to create less of a wall situation. So what I'm trying to get my head around is in this new proposal, how is that the recommendation coming forward from staff makes sense to have that tighter floor plate? And I've heard the glazing will help in terms of the up-down situation, but I'm more interested in sort of the horizontal situation. So if we could just have a sense of why our floor plate is not as recommended in terms of the setbacks and in terms of following the guidelines of other tall building policies that other cities have.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. With respect to the design of the building and the massing in terms of the scale, the width, the height of the building, with the reductions that were made, the shadow impact has been brought down in terms of not impacting as far across the block and some of the prominent properties across the block, specifically the schoolyard. The other thing is with reducing the width of the building at the top with the 3-meter step-in that has been made, the change that's been made to the building with the 3-meter step back from the 10th floor up to the 15th floor. The massing on Queen Street is reduced at the top of the building, together with 3-meter step back from the top of the podium. That space can now be used for terraces and balconies and can be landscaped to soften the appearance. There are more opportunities for landscaping on the terraces with some of the step backs that have been included, again, in terms of softening the edge along Queen Street. With respect to the actual massing and appearance of the wall along Queen Street, one of the elements that the developer worked on was making the frontage along Queen Street look more like bays of different buildings in terms of the articulation within the building facade, mixing up some of the building materials where the loading bays are so that it has the perception of being broken into bays, building bays consistent with other areas along Queen Street. In addition to that, they have also created a pedestrian access point from Queen Street that makes it a more opening entrance for the pedestrians that are in the area or for the residents of the building. So a lot of those factors add up to making that Queen Street facade, where the majority of the mass of the building is, a more friendly mass in terms of the streetscape and the people that will be walking in the area.
Sorry, Director Agnew would like to comment as well.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So just to address your direct question about the floor plate, so certainly as part of receiving the peer review from ERA and looking at that recommendation, so they refer to taller building guidelines from the City of Toronto using a floor plate of 750 square meters for their taller buildings. And the reason that they do that primarily is looking at the densification of a large urban center like Toronto, looking at what they're trying to achieve in a relatively small geographic area and how they're able to do that while still having space between buildings for daylight, separation distance, and some of those functional things that have to be considered when you're looking at building taller structures. So as that relates to Kingston, while we recognize that some municipalities, mostly larger urban centers, do have some of these guidelines that are developed. Again, they're guidelines, they're not policies. In terms of the Kingston context, it's a little bit different. So where Toronto may be using a reduced floor plate, they're also looking at buildings that are 50 and 60 stories tall. So in the city of Kingston, obviously we're not dealing with that type of height. We're not talking about that intensity of use. So when we were looking at that overall recommendation, we also had to go to the policy framework that we have to utilize when evaluating a project and what we're able to request in terms of changes or alterations from a specific proponent. We can't go and make up a policy that we don't have, even though it's a recommendation of perhaps best practice that other municipalities have employed. In the city of Kingston, we currently don't have any standards that even speak to any kind of floor plate restriction period. So for us, while it's always good to be aware of what other municipalities are doing, we have to be aware of the difference of the context that the policies are being applied within, and certainly apply some common sense to how we're able to recommend that on any specific project.
Thank you. And my next question is sort of in terms of the perception of the mass. So in this iteration, in the 15 stories that we're looking at, we have different exterior on the building than what we've seen in previous designs. And so I wanted to understand a little bit more about how we are expecting for that to blend into our city context, because I believe that the purpose was to connect, and I mostly, at the podium level, I'm totally okay up the 3 stories there. That all makes sense to me. It's the tower level that I'm interested in, and sort of viewing it from a distance or viewing it from close, how we sort of expect that design to help integrate it into the streetscape, into the landscape of our downtown, and to mitigate those visual impacts. Because I believe that's a recommendation from us to go to that, to the different cladding on the building. Is that the case?
Through you, Madam Chair, the policies of the downtown and harbor area do specifically contemplate a taller building in this location, provided that the considerations of land use compatibility are addressed. The changes in terms of materiality of the tower and podium are meant to kind of compartmentalize the various aspects of massing and thereby breaking them up as they're visually read by pedestrians. The strong podium does also provide the mitigation in providing a strong visual for those first 3 stories along the streetscape.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. And looking at the way that the materiality is built up between the lower podium with the upper level, again, from an urban design perspective, the incorporation of the red brick, especially with the change that you see in the iteration that's before you along the Queen Street facade, and as Ms. Vendetti indicated before, the way that it was designed to look almost like 3 distinct buildings or kind of walk-up townhouses to give you that visual distinction to break up the sense of building massing. Part of the intention of the use of the red brick was to give an overall nod to some of the more established buildings in the area that have heritage character. Some of that red brick is certainly reminiscent of previous eras of building and is reflective throughout the downtown in certain areas. So there was that sense of trying to be reflective of that through a new iteration of a building, while at the same time juxtaposing that with a newer materiality on the upper floors with the glazing and more of like a limestone or a stone finish, again, being Kingston's a limestone city, but also bringing in that modernity where you have the juxtaposition between heritage and a new structure and trying to make it blend in with the area and be compatible from a visual perspective.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for questions right now.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Osanek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question about the traffic impact study, and that it says that to maintain better sight lines, the exit on Queen Street might have to be right in and right out, only access. And I just wondered who determines that, if that would be necessary or not, and that would be at site plan, correct? And is it our transportation staff that are ultimately deciding that?
Through you, Madam Chair, the technical review of the application to date with the submitted traffic impact study, staff have identified that there will be further traffic work required at site plan to put forward specific recommendations as to the interface between pedestrians and the vehicle access along Queen Street. And they will also need to look at, in further depth, that recommendation about limiting the type of access on Queen Street as well. Staff have received a site plan application for this development that's currently active, and should the zoning bylaw amendment be approved, we would be looking to work with the applicant to receive the additional information, which would be reviewed by our traffic division.
Any other questions from the committee? Councillor Hutchison, would you like to ask some questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple, thank you.
Okay.
I'm just trying to understand, I have to say I've been out of town, so this all came out while I was away. So, so bear with me here. I'm just trying to understand the reasoning behind some of the decisions that arrived us at the recommendation. That specifically, we arrive at 16 stories, 15 plus 1 mechanical. In the second peer review, defines, it says right here, defines low teens as 13 stories. So I don't see an explanation in the parts that I've been able to read that explains why we would go to 16. since 16 is not low teens, it's smack in the middle between 13 and 19. So it's a mid-teen. So I'm wondering, what is the reasoning there? Because that, as I say, I haven't been able to see where that's explained.
Through you, Madam Chair. The recommended height of the building is a product of considering two key themes within the official plan. A strong emphasis towards encouraging intensification in the downtown, in the primary center in which the property is located, as well as mitigating potential impacts in terms of the cultural heritage resources of the site.
Okay, so that perhaps this should have been my first question. Okay, there's a whole listing of things here about how it fulfills the provincial policy statement and different elements of the official plan and so on. And I actually don't think anybody would question that too closely. But the problem for me is that the conditions, the reasons given relative to the provincial policy statement and the official plan and so on would apply to any development that's allowed under the bylaw. And it seems to me the crucial question is, why should this development be allowed to be higher than the current bylaw, since they have to get a bylaw amendment to allow for it? And so all the reasons I see listed here apply to any development. So what's the crucial difference? That answer didn't really do it. So I'm wondering there should be quite a lot of writing actually about why it's allowed to be higher when the lower allowance for the bylaw would fulfill all these conditions as well.
Through you, Madam Chair, the zoning bylaw that sets the maximum height for the Queen Street side at the 25.5 meters, that's a 1996 zoning bylaw. The current official plan on which the application is being reviewed against incorporates a number of policy considerations that make a stronger emphasis for seeing intensification on sites like this within the downtown. I think it's important to note that the subject site is not located in a heritage conservation district. It's located in heritage areas that are identified for future study for possible future protection under the Heritage Act. And one of the considerations of land use compatibility is functional needs. I think the application has demonstrated that it meets the amenity space requirements. It proposes a reasonable parking ratio to supply parking to the site while being transit supportive. So all of those elements work together to encourage the height or to support the height that's being recommended.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, just to expand on that, in looking at a proposal such as this one, there's a number of criteria and factors throughout the plan that need to be looked at. The plan, as well as the provincial policy statement, need to be looked at as a whole in terms of the overall goals and objectives of the provincial policy statement, the overall goals and objectives and structure of the plan. So in looking at a proposal like this, it's not as straightforward as simply looking at the height of the building. It's looking at the form and function and fit of what is proposed in terms of how does the building that's proposed fit within the area, which is a measure of compatibility, which is a measure of how it is going to function, the quality of space that's being proposed in terms of does it meet the amenity space requirements, as Ms. Lambert indicated, How does the parking ratio that's being proposed fit within the downtown, within the goals and objectives of the official plan in terms of providing parking, but still encouraging active transportation? What are the goals of our plan with respect to intensification? So the Princess Street corridor, as well as the downtown center, is where growth is intended to occur in the municipality based on the vision of the official plan. In looking specifically at the proposed height of the structure, what we're looking at is what's permitted under the existing zoning and what's being requested, and what's the difference in impact between the two. Because we recognize that this is a site in the downtown that's a heritage building or a listed building with value, with cultural heritage value, and it's in an area that's intended for intensification. So what's the appropriate form of intensification and what can function on the site? In this case, we've got a proposal to reuse the heritage facade, which is consistent with the goals and objectives of the provincial policy statement in terms of maintaining cultural heritage, but it's also meeting the goals and objectives in terms of intensification. So in balancing all of the objectives with respect to intensification and built form, we have to look at what the difference in impact between what's permitted and what's proposed is. And in doing that, we looked at what was originally proposed with a 20-story structure, and we had challenges in terms of being able to support that. The developer went away based on comments that were provided through the peer review as well as comments from staff, and came back with a building that was reduced in scale down to 17 stories, which was the subject of the second public meeting. Staff still expressed concerns with the form and structure of that building in terms of compatibility, fit, and function, although function wasn't really one of our primary concerns because, as has been indicated throughout this process, they were providing a reasonable parking ratio as well as meeting the amenity space requirements. So in the end, coming down to a 16-story building where the 16th story doesn't include any residential space but is amenity space and rooftop mechanical, in looking at that and in looking at some of the other design articulations that we were able to work with the developer to achieve, and looking at the impact and the changes in impact from the 20-story building to a 15-story building based on what was also permitted as of right, based on our review of the overall structure of the official plan, the recommendation from staff was that the impacts could be mitigated and had been mitigated, and that's why a recommendation to support the project was brought forward.
So,
Thank you.
So go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, just again to elaborate upon that. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the peer review and the opinion of ERA is an important consideration as part of the overall technical review process for this project. But there was also two other sets of professional planners that reviewed this project in detail over the course of almost 2 years, and that would have been those that are internal to the City of Kingston as part of our planning staff. And the developer also had their own set of technical experts that guided them through the process of putting together their proposal, which included not only a land use planner, it included architect, and it also includes someone that's also a specialist in urban design. So there's a lot of technical expertise and opinion that went into evaluating this proposal, and with what you see before you tonight as the recommendation from staff. What typically happens too with a peer reviewer is going to come in as a third party, and they're not necessarily going to have the level of comfort with being able to make any kind of progressive recommendation with respect to a site. They're not going to have the sense of comfort with our overall policies, with understanding what's going on in terms of the city's overall vision. They're going to make some comments from a best practice perspective, but that's where city staff has the benefit of coming in and doing additional detail and understanding the full breadth of what we're trying to achieve as a city, and where we've looked at what we've also done in terms of other recent approvals and had a level of comfort with looking at something like angular plane. And a lot of the recommendations that came out of the peer review specifically related to the height that they recommended were what could fit inside a box within the angular plane that is within the policies that we currently have. So there's a number of other places within the city where we have approved a similar angular plane, not necessarily a full mass of a building going up in the angular plane, but areas where a building will pierce into the angular plane, but through good building design, articulation, step backs, something that can be overall compatible with the area and something that can be experienced in a compatible way with the existing built form in the streetscape. So these are all the types of considerations that went into looking at what came up with the overall 15-story proposal that the developer put forward. Staff did a lot of detailed technical analysis, not only looking at the peer review, but also doing our own internal analysis, looking at shadowing impact, looking at different massing models. And of course, we also had to do a very detailed review of all of the technical studies that came in to support the application, which included the shadowing analysis, the urban design study that supported the 15-story proposal that you have before you tonight.
Councillor Hutchison?
Yeah. Okay, I guess there'd be a lot to say about that. That was a lot. But I think that I was trying to say that I saw that had been done. Not in all that detail, and I didn't go into it, but that it comes down to basically relative intensification. And what do you consider is appropriate, given all the other elements that you just mentioned? I have a question here. What was said here was that we couldn't adopt the city, I think is probably the argument, the City of Toronto floor plate numbers, or because we didn't have what I heard you say is the bylaw doesn't allow for that kind of restriction, that we don't have a policy for that. That's correct, right? Okay, so it seems to me that that's why there's a height restriction. The two are interplayed, and in the peer review, the ERA makes a pretty clear argument that the developers should, to get around, they do suggest about the City of Toronto floor plate sizes. However, they also argue, as I remember, that this is the way in which you can address this issue. One way to do is look at floor plate analysis. Or height. Height is in the background of that whole argument. And so I think that's one of the reasons why, I mean, I don't know what you would say to that. It seems to me that height is the underlying, they know there's objections, they know it's not appropriate, they tell you, and they finally, in the second review, told us this is what we meant by low teens, because height is another way of controlling the amount of floor space and the nature of the building. It's a premise, the whole argument about floor plate size. So my question, I guess, is why don't we seem to recognize that?
I'm not sure we can answer that one. It's sort of a theoretical question, or?
I can see where you're coming from, but my whole point is that these are all interrelated factors that go into a formalization of a proposal. And when ERA was looking at the problem, this is why they brought up floor plates. This is one way to get the height down, right? So we didn't need to take that argument. Well, we couldn't, to be fair to staff. They could not take that because we didn't have a policy.
Yes, we didn't have a policy, yeah.
But we do have height. because that's set up in the bylaw. That's my point.
Yeah.
So one last question based on the basic on this. The setbacks of the, I'm just quoting here, it's not a, the setbacks of the building to other buildings or potential for other tall buildings in proximity to this site will be regulated through building code separations. Two questions. How does that work, building code separations, if you can do it briefly? And the second question is, what's the definition of in proximity? Because, I'll tell you where I'm going, contextual precedence.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So building code separations has to do with when you have residential land uses that are side by side, you have to have a certain amount of separation distance, not only for fire protection, but also for privacy issues. So it's a matter of having a certain distance to ensure that you don't have two people literally living like this with no light, no air between them, and also seeing each other getting dressed in the morning. There's the functional aspect of it as well. So there's that component that's built into the building code to look at those functional needs as well as some of the safety issues as well. Did you want to comment on that? I don't have it. What your second question was related to? I didn't hear you. Proximity?
It's being argued here that the setbacks of the building or potential for other tall buildings in proximity to this site, and then goes into building code separations, which I've got now. I just want to make sure I understood the statement. It says, I'm asking do we have a definition of what in proximity means?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe that that's a general reference in terms of the nature of the area. So when you're talking about in proximity, you've got to look at the lot fabric and the way the block itself is put together. So when you look at the subject site, it's one of the larger land holdings on the block. In order for another tall building to be potentially proposed here, there would have to be some significant property consolidation to even pull together the property fabric to be able to do that. With respect to the site that's in front of us, there is a large development site at the back of the property along Queen Street because of the configuration of the land. So when you're looking at proximity, we'd have to consider designated heritage buildings in the area, other listed heritage buildings in the area, what the constraints to actual development would be to allowing something of a larger scale to occur. So it really comes down to site context in terms of what a site can carry.
Okay, so a number of factors have to come into it. That's what I got from that. Okay, fair enough. So this brings me to my final question. And that is one of the, aside from the considerations for the specific proposal, one of the fears of the public is contextual precedent. And I can tell you that developers have put it to me that if I get, so-and-so gets X, I expect to get at least X. And I've spoken to staff about this. And it's not the first time and the only time it's been put to me. So where is the protection that this cannot be done again in some place that almost everyone would agree is inappropriate? And I'm sort of quoting someone who's in favor of it. And they said, and I can name them if you want, but I don't see the point of it. They said, I think we would all agree that there are certain places that are inappropriate, but this isn't one of them. That's their statement, not mine. So I'm assuming from that there will be a wider consensus that there are certain places where a building of this proposed height, massing, and so on would be inappropriate. So one of the fears is, of many people, is if you allow this, what prevents us from getting, if we allow X, what prevents us from getting X or X plus? And where is that in the proposal? Is the recommendation?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So while I can understand what you're putting forward in terms of an overall concern about setting precedent, again, from a land use planning perspective, we do review every individual proposal on the merits of that proposal. So because we've recommended the building that you have before you tonight doesn't mean that across the street I'm going to say, hey, we don't even have to do the planning analysis on that one because, hey, we're good on this one and we've made this recommendation. We go through that technical analysis on any single proposal, and that's the nature of land use planning. So unless, as a city, which I don't think we do because it would be contrary to many of the overall goals of our council, decide to put an interim control bylaw in our downtown, which doesn't allow any new developments ever again, we're always, as a city, going to be confronted with proposals that look to bring new development to our city. We do have a policy framework that they're measured against. We have a lot of very detailed policies. As many people have commented tonight, the report before you it's 60 pages of analysis, so it's not something that's taken lightly. There's a lot of sections in the official plan that are referenced and cross-referenced and analyzed with respect to any development proposal before an application has a recommendation that comes before a committee. So in terms of that piece, we have the zoning that's in place that makes a recommendation. We have our official plan. There's all of the policy tests that have to be met in terms of the functional land use and the compatibility with the built form of the area, looking at any potential impacts that would result from a development. So all I can say is that any other development proposal would be reviewed based on its merits, its technical merits, its design components, and analyzed against the policy tests that we have as a city with respect to approving any development. That's the process that we have before us. So while our policies may, in terms of the zoning, have a maximum height of 25.5 meters, our official plan also has another set of policies in it that says in our downtown area, based on the fact that we want intensification and this is where we want people to live, taller buildings may be considered subject to the functional land use and compatibility criteria of the official plan, and subject to an urban design study, and subject to a traffic study, and subject to X, Y, and Z, which is, again, the process by which the report that's before you tonight has been put together. So that's what our policies say. That's what we have to review as staff when it comes before us. And certainly in this case, the developer chose initially to put forward a proposal that was a 20-story proposal. The policy in the official plan doesn't say to a maximum height of this or must be a minimum height. It just says taller buildings can be contemplated. So staff responds to the proposals that are put before them. We do our detailed analysis. We get peer reviews. We provide feedback. And again, we have to be satisfied that the technical merits of the proposal have met all of the compatibility and policy test criteria that are in our documents. And that's the process that we've gone through. So that would be the same process for any piece of land that's subject to any development proposal on a go-forward basis. While I can appreciate the fear about precedent, again, our policy documents don't give any future development proposal a pass because there's something that's built of a similar shape and size and in proximity to it. You still have to go through that process and be satisfied that the technical merits are there.
And I would agree that you would do that job, okay? I was not questioning that whatsoever. And that the city would do that. I just don't know how much it counts for when you get to the OMB.
Okay, thank you for that lively exchange. More questions from the committee? We have a recommendation from staff. I'd like to see if we put it on the floor and then have any more questions, statements, and then vote on it clause by clause. So is there a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Allen, seconded by Councillor Turner. Comments, questions? Councillor Neal.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick comment and question for some clarity. I know about 5:30 tonight, we received an addendum to the addendum that I believe showed a shadow study that had the winter solstice shadow profile. That was, I believe, tagged by a member of the community who said, we have these summer, spring, summer, fall, but we don't have a winter. How was that oversight? How did that oversight happen? Because, of course, the winter solstice shadow study is the most damning of the shadow studies. So perhaps you could comment on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, with respect to that, it wasn't that it was an oversight. We had the initial shadow studies with the winter solstice for the 20-story building that came in originally, recognizing that the building had been reduced in scale and height, and knowing that the winter shadows, as you have noted, are the largest shadows of all in terms of the time of day and the amount of shadowing that occurs. We were looking at what was permitted as of right based on that, because we did have that as well, and looking at it. And what the winter solstice report did show was that I believe it's a 5-story building that's there already, creates some shadows with respect to the schoolyard, and that the building height as reduced does have a minor impact with respect to that, but is basically consistent with the existing shadow in the air on that area, and that it continues to rotate across the site through the day as it does with respect to any other season.
I guess I'm not sure that answered my question. Why did that come to us at such a late date? I mean, for several of us, the curse of coming here at 6:30 and finding a 130-page addendum on our desk, virtually we have no time to look at it. And that's troubling if it's relevant information.
Through you, Madam Chair, to elaborate on that, it came at the time it came because a member of the public asked for that information. That was information that, as I said, the worst shadows typically occur in the winter. We had the other seasons in terms of being able to fully review what the shadow impact was. We made assumptions with respect to what the winter solstice would be, but based on the request we received, we wanted to ensure that we made that information available. So we had the consultant prepare that information, so we had it to provide. Staff had already made recommendations based on the existing shadow studies that we had. We weren't concerned with respect to the specific winter information based on what we already knew, but we wanted to ensure that that information was available to the committee and to the public based on what we could provide. So it was prepared at the last minute, and that's why you received it when you did.
So when did the city actually receive the study that's in our addendum today that shows the winter solstice shadows?
We received that, I believe, on Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. No, this week.
Thank you. I guess I sometimes find things troubling when we seem to be given some information, but not all the information. I remember I taught for 28 years at high school, and I always had an opportunity every semester to say to my classes, how stupid do you think I am? Don't answer that question. And I feel like sometimes, and it happened earlier, and whether it's just an oversight or when a proponent planner comes in and says, we're asking for a minor variance of 3 meters, and somebody in the public says, well, what is the required setback? Oh, it's 38 meters. I think that's information has to be given to us in an open fashion, and if there are serious reasons why we have to go from 38 meters to 3, because it's an old bylaw that doesn't make sense anymore, whatever, then we should be given that information. So we're making an informed decision, and we aren't basing our decision on well, that's a minor variance, but we don't know what the original number is. So in future, and I realize that if we just received that a couple days ago, it's hard to get it out, but perhaps emailing the committee the information so that we can actually see it, because it is a significant piece of information. So, thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Councillor McLaren?
Thank you. I cannot yet support this application for 4 reasons. First, it does not seem to support enough of the intents of the official plan. Second, there seems to be insufficient justification provided for amending the height portion or provision in the bylaw. Third, I also believe that the negotiation procedure starts at the wrong anchor point. And fourth, the staff comprehensive report has some errors and incompleteness to it because it has missed, several relevant points in some important planning tests. So with regards to my first point, one of the intents of the official plan is to intensify the city. One of the points that I've received as education from staff is that we do not want hard numbers in the OP, rather they should be in the zoning bylaw. To this end, it would seem that the zoning bylaw has provided the hard numbers to determine how much intensification is acceptable. I refer you to the second peer review's addendum, in which we can see that the zoning bylaw provides for 3 to 4 times the existing massing. It's a 2-story building, and it allows for 8 stories. The massing is going up already by 4 times based on the existing building. It also allows for an infinite amount of intensification. The building is currently empty, all right? If you put 10 new units into a 100-unit building, the intensification goes up 10%. You add 1 more unit when there are no units there, it's an undefined infinite amount. We have, with the existing bylaw in this case, already an infinite amount of intensification. In this sense, I can see why one might not want an official plan. However, there are other points of education that I have received from staff, and one of them is that the OP should be read in its entirety. I heard that earlier today, as a matter of fact, and thought of as a whole to ensure that all applicable policies are considered. In other words, we should not be looking only at one intent to justify applications, and similarly, we should not be looking only at one intention to determining whether an OP amendment is needed. We really cannot just look at intensification. As I read the OP, I've discerned at least 3 relevant intents in addition to the intensification intention. And these 3 relevant ones for the sake of this argument are: 1, to protect, conserve, and strategically deploy natural, cultural, and built resources in the city. It's in section 2 goal. I believe that putting a 21st century 15-story building in the midst of 2, 3, and 4-story 18th and 19th century human-scale buildings goes against the OP's intention to protect, conserve cultural built resources, especially as it relates to a sense of place. And in the second peer review, it suggests in terms of appropriateness of massing and density. A second and closely related intent discernible in the OP is to enhance cultural heritage resources, and that's also in OP section 2.8, including skylines, viewscapes, and view planes. In some cases, the term to and from is used, such as in section 7.3A2. To and from, this is important because we need to get seeing from it and towards it. I've been educated by city staff that bylaws are the concrete legal rules that implement the intents of the official plan. It therefore seems that we should not change the bylaw without changing, annulling, or exempting the relevant connected intents of the official plan. Because as both the official plan and the Planning Act say, this is in section 1.1, no zoning bylaw or public work can be undertaken that is contrary to the OP. Changing the bylaw requires, as a precondition, changing all the applicable policies in the OP. And hence, I submit that we really do need an OP Amendment 2. A third intent I have discerned in the OP is to manage the degree of change with an orderly transition. Again, the current bylaw provides for the correct and acceptable numbers. The current bylaw already allows for over 3 times as much density and massing than currently exists. And note the currently. Currently is important, as we'll see in one of the documents later. This is what the community has considered orderly and managed transition. If we amend the bylaw, we necessarily break from the intent of the official plan in this case. And so really the proponent should be applying for an OP amendment to allow for disorderly and unmanaged transition. So remember, the OP gives intents and the zoning bylaw gives cold hard numbers to those to implement those intents. The height limit in the zoning bylaw, as I understand it, from the people who were involved in the original crafting in 1996, was arrived at with broad public consultation and support, and therefore reflects the will and sentiment of the people at the time. And based on a lot of these letters, it clearly reflects the sentiment of the people today. The sentiment of the people is not out of date. Neither is this bylaw or the height restriction that is mentioned in it. And we shouldn't be discounting this. And so my first point is that this zoning amendment meets one OP intent, but fails to respect at least 3 other intents. It has not been demonstrated that one intent significantly outweighs the other 3 intents, nor that they have been mitigated in healthy ways for the community. Therefore, the official response that there is no need for an OP amendment, this is on page 52 of the staff report, seems both incorrect as far as it goes and incomplete as it is missing all proper considerations. Missing some, but not all, I should say. My second point, and this is similar to what Councillor Hutchinson was saying, the entire comprehensive report seems to give reasons to build, not reasons to amend the bylaw. So the question before us is not whether to build. We want something here, okay? That should be clear. We want something to be built. The question is whether we should amend the bylaw. And so if you consider the list that was given in the provincial policy statements, you have all these reasons to build, and they fit an as of right bylaw compliant building just as much as any non-bylaw compliant building. That's what I mean by it is reasons to build, not reasons to amend the bylaw. So, okay, let's skip that part. So the question again before us is whether to amend the bylaw. The question is not whether to build or not to build. The reason and rationale provided in this report have not provided any good reason to amend the bylaw. They are all reasons to build and more or less equally useful in justifying a 25.5 meter as of right building. Reasons to amend the bylaw should take the form of comparing contradictory OP intents and showing how their relative and net total value for the city would be increased with a zoning bylaw amendment. This is where the question of whether we should amend a bylaw is answered. The question of whether to amend a zoning bylaw does not appear to have been answered clearly nor satisfactorily in this report. And my point number 3, there seems to be a predisposition of thought that the law should be the starting anchor point for negotiations in each instance. This seems not quite right. We have a bylaw. It's the law. An application for change should give good reasons why the community would benefit more if the bylaw were to be altered or not enforced. But this is not what appears to be happening here. The zoning bylaw seems to be treated as the starting anchor point for a negotiation, similar to how car and real estate vendors start with an asking price and then try and get the best deal. I submit to you that the bylaw was actually set up to be a limit to which you try and get to. The law is our collective enterprise. Okay? It's a social contract that affects all of us as a community. It is not a commodity to be discarded at the first opportune minute for the highest price. The law is our collective inheritance, the fabric of our social life, and the substance of peace, order, and good government. It is debasing and perverse to treat these noble aspects of the community as mere disposable commodities because they are irreplaceable when lost. Again, we really shouldn't be thinking of it as an anchor point to start the negotiations. This is a limit. It's sort of like homicide laws. You don't feel like you want to kill somebody because you're in road rage and then negotiate with the law a way to get around a murder trial. That's just perverse. That's not how it works. And this is what we're talking about here is law, not a commodity. And my fourth point, while the report seems to evade the real question of whether to amend the bylaw or not, there appear to be two major types of errors in the report: errors of fact and errors of omission. So let me give two examples of errors of fact. On page 20 of the staff report, it alleges that, quote, there are no significant views of cultural heritage resources in the area of the subject site that are identifiable in the official plan. May I draw your attention to section 3.10.A.10, which claims that, and I quote, new development must protect the views to and from fortifications as set out in section 7. And then I go to section 7, 7.3A to B to be precise, in which protection must be afforded to viewscapes to and from the fortifications. And finally, section 7 itself in the Heritage Act make explicit reference to scenic vistas, view planes, and streetscapes. The downtown and harbor area is identified in many places as just such a place. Just consider, if I may, section 10A.4.1, where it is in fact so defined. That's an omission. And a second one, on page 21 of 56, there's a reference to improved human scale, as if getting closer to human scale is possible and equivalent to human scale. This is incorrect. Human scale is a quality that is or is not. It is like death. You are either dead or you are alive. Okay? Only in poetry or metaphor can you say you're half dead, but even then, that equals you are alive. Okay? There is no room for poetics and proper planning rationales. Something is or is not human scale. Getting closer to human scale is equal to not human scale. Therefore, since human scale is a condition to satisfy, claiming improved human scale is an admission that this condition is not satisfied while wording it in a way that makes it sound as if it were satisfied. I think this is grammatically inappropriate. Now consider three errors of omission. First, concerning the downtown harbor area architectural guidelines, starting on page 37 of the staff report, a list appears which seems to be an example of picking and choosing the friendly policies and omitting the policy points that do not benefit the desired outcome. The following points, which I find quite damning of the proposed application, are simply not mentioned. And I'm going to quote, City Council should not permit upzoning that will result in the creation of new buildings tall enough to fundamentally change the image of downtown and harbor area. ... ellipse. Further, rezoning within the downtown and harbor area over and above the density and existing zoning allows are most certain to undermine the much admired existing urban and architectural character of the area. That's on page 4 and continues through to page 5. And the second one, it is our view, this is quote, it is our view in regard to such urban design considerations as massing, setbacks, and height, complement and complementary should be taken to mean that the massing of the proposed new design would be similar to that of the existing building. Here we have existing again. This is why I'm saying earlier that it's important that we look at the existing building, not the as-of-right theoretical building. And that setbacks, height, and the street facade are also similar to it. In short, as far as the volumetrics of a new building or addition to an existing building are concerned, complementary should be considered to mean very, quote, very similar to, and that's on page 7 of the Downtown Harbor Area Architectural Guideline Study. The consultants who wrote the study that make up part of the OP say, don't change the bylaw here. respect the bylaw. No real reason has been given to amend this bylaw, and reasons have been given not to amend the bylaw. A second and third examples of errors of omission are found on page 20 of the staff report. And if you turn to page 20, H and I there's a list of adverse effects. When you get to H and I, reduction, H, I'll read it out. It says, reduction in the ability to enjoy a property or the normal amenity associated with it, including safety and access, outdoor areas, historic quality, or setting. This is an adverse effect that we have to deal with, but in the staff report, there's no comments on how those are arranged. And it strikes me that the height is the main issue there. And there's no, all the other ones, most of the other ones have reasons why they've been amended or alleviated, but not that one. And then also for I, visual intrusion that disrupts the streetscape, building, or cultural heritage resource. Visual intrusion. This is an adverse effect that is not dealt with in the staff report. I submit to you that for these reasons, we need to satisfy all policies in all documents. I think I heard that earlier today. And we have at least a couple of documents I pointed out here in which they're not all satisfied and not all considered. So this application does not fulfill the intents of the official plan in my view. It does not provide justification for amending the bylaw. It is following the wrong negotiation process, and it is missing critical information. For all these reasons, I find that I cannot support it, and I'm sorry for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the committee before we call the vote? Councillor Neal?
Just very quickly, because I don't think I've annoyed everybody in the room yet, so I've got one other comment to make. Having been on council in the 90s, I know that the original expectation for Queen Street was not residential, but times have changed. And indeed, what it was commercial office space. So for those people who keep sending emails saying the bylaw and the OP only allow for 4 to 6 stories, those are 4 to 6, as I understand it, and staff can correct me, but those are 4 to 6 commercial or office stories. When you're talking about a residential, it's a height limitation in meters, and that's somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, between 7 and 8 residential stories. Is that correct? So by right, it would be an 8-story under existing OP. And so I just wanted to point that out because people are under the impression that there should only be between 4 and 6 stories on that site. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a few comments. I hopefully won't take as long. It's been a long night, but I think that it needs to be said that someone has to take the side of the builder here, and I think that it's a good design. I think he's worked really, really hard with the community and with our planning department, and he's made a lot of good changes, and I'm very pleased with his design, and I think it'll bring some vibrancy and help the economy downtown, and I think we need to support this, and I think it's important for Kingston. I think it's important for the future of Kingston, and when you think about how many people have shown interest, I believe 65% of this building has been pre-sold. I think that's a great sign that people are interested and want to live downtown and want to live in this location. I think also he has worked really hard in changing the facade, and I really like the design, and I think in other cities you can see old with new, and I think it looks really nice. And I think that I'm really happy with this, and I'm going to support it. And I think we should look to the future, and I think we should look at new designs. And I don't think we should scare away people. I think this is good. This builder's worked hard, and I think we should support it. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Thank you. This, this project and this committee and this room, we've been split for this whole conversation. The whole community, the whole council, we're all split, and I think that reflects challenging conversations and challenging topics when it comes to change. And change is something that we are excited about, but also scared of as a community. And this project really sort of has catalyzed that conversation, and it's really, really difficult. And in terms of things that the planning staff have mentioned about how they have to consider the specific context of a specific building in each application, like that's true. And as a council, we have to and as a committee, we have to consider things at a larger level. Unfortunately, the policies aren't perfect. And those of you that were on council last term will know that when we talk about estate residential. We had specifically in the official plan gone out to stop estate residential, and there were still provisions within the plan that allowed estate residential. And so we can only learn and grow as a document in terms of how that works. And in this case, there are policies from 1996 that set out certain heights, but we have an official plan that was authored in 2010 that has a specific clause that says that with an urban design study that additional height might be considered, and as part of intensification, as part of sustainability. So we're already looking at contradictions everywhere, and it's confusing and it's tough to figure out what's best for our city. And heritage, we had an email from somebody recently who said, like, heritage will always be here, but some of the other things won't, and we have to think about how we're going to complement our heritage with a thriving downtown and with additional sustainable approaches to development in our city. One of the reasons, that's one of the reasons I'm supporting this, is because as hard as it is, we have to consider that demand for a different kind of living exists among the new people who are purchasing homes. And when we think of buildings like this, we don't necessarily think of them as homes that we purchase, but this is a home, an relatively affordable home for many people compared to some real estate values in downtown Kingston and across Kingston. So there is the ability for different generation of people who are considering living in a compact way to have a place to live and own and build equity without having to pay rent to do it. Doesn't mean that the height's justified, doesn't mean that everything goes there, but this is part of what the process has been to kind of find the right building that fits in the right place. We are going to need some tall buildings as part of our intensification strategy. And when we say tall, I mean, this is what we're talking about, 15 stories here in Kingston. Because this council, we're being aggressive about transit, we're being aggressive about active transportation. Well, we need people on those corridors to use those amenities that we're investing in. And we're going to have a tough conversation about how we're going to keep property tax bills down when we're aggressively accelerating transit, if we're not putting in intense uses along those corridors to help take that cost. So in this case, I'm talking at a very high level as a councillor. From a planning perspective, I've listened to staff, I've read the reports, I've read the background studies, and I've come to terms with the fact I'm comfortable with this and moving forward. And so that's why I'm supporting it. But I think it's good that we all don't support it. I think it's good that we disagree on it, because I think it's important that we demonstrate that difference and embrace that difference as a council to find the strongest way forward and the best applications forward. So I'm supporting this at this point, and we'll see what happens next.
Thank you. Councillor Osanek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I won't be supporting it for the number one reason of the height that's being looked at. I would have been more easily convinced if they were asking for 11 or 12 stories, but not for the 15, 16 that's being asked here, which is double the height that's allowed. So that's why I won't be supporting it.
My turn. Would you take the chair, please?
I will
Councillor
indeed,
Neal.
and I do recognize you.
Thank you. When this first was proposed, I was shocked at the height, but I was really excited at the location. I was thrilled, actually, that there was a building finally going to be not on the water, in the heart of the city, that was across the road from the Grand, walking distance to the library, doctors, lawyers, dentists, metro, music, the waterfront, artillery park, every kind of store that you would need except, I think I figured linens and towels and bedding downtown. It's everything is down here, restaurants, and of course, the ability to just walk out your door and everything's there. Its walkability is, to me, one of the most prime spots in the city. It was a vacant spot. It looked like it was going to sit there for a long, long time. The important heritage piece at the front was automatically going to be restored. I mean, that was a no-brainer. And through time, with questions that were asked of staff, the building started to go down in height. But a big one for me is it was in the heart of the city, it wasn't on the water. There's a giant cement building right across here that I've always disliked. Except I can remember Tom Plunkett, who taught at Queen's. He was a municipal teacher. He's a fabulous guy. And a few years ago, he said, I fought against that building across the road, but when I became old and frail, I was so grateful it was there because he could move there. It was accessible, and he could live in the heart of the city, which is where he wanted to be, because he couldn't be in a house anymore. He couldn't have stairs, right? And it affected me. It was at least, I was not in politics. So, no, I was probably protesting something, actually, and he was there. But it affected me because it really made sense about why people want buildings like this. They want to live here. I know there are a number of people here who have bought in this building. There is a building on Princess Street called the Nottingham, I think, that is very similar in look for the lower portion. And there's another building in town that's very similar in the sense that it has the red brick and then the white. So the white kind of blends with the sky, and it really does work. It's amazing when you look at it. Like it's in the West End, but I can't remember the exact location. So I am well in support of this. I realize that we don't know what the future brings for this building, however City Council votes. I know the word precedent comes up, but we already have an entire waterfront covered in high-rises that I am sorry about. So when something this important to me for the livability of the city of Kingston, for getting people downtown, when as a councillor for the city, I hear over and over again, I never come downtown, and the minute I don't have to, I won't. I want people living downtown, because it's not going to survive if we keep make a whole new east-west connection that can avoid the downtown. I think this type of building is vital. Councillor Neal is absolutely right that 20 years ago, nobody even thought about living downtown. The provincial government brought in a program that provided money for landlords to turn their second, third, fourth stories into apartments. The Indigo building has just now turned its second floor into apartments because they're not going to be able to rent big stores anymore downtown. They recognized it. So livability downtown is just incredibly important, and I'm very supportive of it. I'm very supportive of the way staff have handled this and negotiated and worked hard, especially the idea of community benefits. I don't know what the finals will be if this all, because that is, again, in the future, and again, people can make comments about community benefits now, because nothing's written in stone about that. There are proposals in the recommendation, but nothing is completed in terms of community benefits. So I definitely support this, and we'll see what happens next. So we have...
Thank you.
Sorry?
Just quickly,
Oh,
I'm
would
not
you like to give me the
anticipating the
floor?
vote, but perhaps you and the clerk can explain to the public what happens in the event of a tie vote, because I know several people have been asking me.
Well, certainly. We're going to vote, and if it's a tie vote, it means it loses at the planning committee. It still goes to council because council makes the final decision. This committee does not make the final decision. So if it loses, it goes to council on the 20th with the statement that it lost at committee, and council then votes. So, and you would like all of the that clauses to be separated. So I'll call the vote if there are no further comments or questions. Okay. So the first that, I'll read them since we're...
There's an easier.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
First recommendation that the application for an amendment to create a new community improvement project area in the City of Kingston Community Improvement Plan for Brownfields Project Areas 1A, 1B, 1C, submitted by FOTEN Consultants Incorporated on behalf of the IN8 Capital Developments Incorporated for the property municipally known as 223 Princess Street, be approved. All those in favor? And that's carried. 2, that it be recommended to council that bylaw number 2005-40, a bylaw to designate brownfields project areas 1A, 1B, 1C as community improvement project areas as amended, be further amended as per Exhibit A to report number PC 16085. All those in favor? Thank you. That it be recommended to council that bylaw number 2005-41, a bylaw to adopt the community improvement plan for brownfields project areas 1A, 1B, 1C as amended, be further amended as per Exhibit B, draft bylaw and schedules A, B, C, D, E, F, and G to add site-specific policies to and replace mapping of the brownfield CIP to report number PC 16085. All those in favor? That's carried. 4, that the amending bylaws be presented to council for all 3 readings. It relates to what we just voted on. All those in favor? So that would be the amending bylaws to do with the first 3. 5, that the application for a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by FOTEN Consultants Incorporated on behalf of IN8, the Capital Developments Incorporated, for the property known as, municipally known as 223 Princess Street, be approved. All those in favor? So that's 3 in favor, and all those opposed, 3 opposed, so that loses on a tie. 6, that council designates the subject site at 223 Princess Street to be a Class 4 area as per the environmental noise guideline of NPC 300 of the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, subject to a related holding symbol being applied in the amending zoning bylaw. All those in favor? 3 in favor. Opposed? 3 opposed. That loses on a tie. 7, that bylaw number 96-259 of the Corporation of the City of Kingston entitled Downtown and Harbor Zoning Bylaw of the Corporation of the City of Kingston be amended, be further amended as per Exhibit C, draft bylaw and Schedule A to be to amend zoning bylaw number 96-259 to report number PC 16085. I might need explanation for that one. Or is the committee comfortable voting on this? So this is part 7. All those in favor? 3 in favor. Opposed? 3 opposed. That loses on a tie. 8, that council determines that in accordance with Section 3417 of the Planning Act, no further notice is required prior to the passage of the bylaw. All those in favor? 3 in favor, opposed, 3 opposed, and that loses on a tie. That the amending, I am at 9, that the amending bylaw be presented to council for all 3 readings. All those in favor? 3 in favor, 3, and opposed, 3 opposed, that loses on a tie. 10, that council approves the community benefits being sought under Section 37 of the Planning Act and authorizes the mayor and clerk, following the review and recommendation by staff, including the city solicitor, to execute a community benefits agreement with the applicant. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. And we have no motions, notices of motion, other business or correspondence. And the next meeting is September 15th, 6:30. Motion to...
Could I just ask staff a quick question? I know typically if that had passed on the 20th, it would have come with a bylaw for council approval. But as it is now, I assume it will come on the 20th looking for council not looking for council to approve the bylaw, but looking to council to, if they choose to overturn the decision of this committee, which lost on a 3-3 tie. Is that accurate?
Through you, Madam Chair. So we would have the bylaw ready at council meeting in case council overturned the committee decision. Therefore, then council can approve the bylaw as it stands.
But isn't the decision point on the 20th whether council wants to overturn the decision of this committee, and the bylaw then would come forward at our next council meeting? Perhaps we can ask legal or the clerks to clarify that.
Yes, I think
there's a clause.
Mr. Bologna is here.
So thank you, Madam Chair. In keeping with what the Commissioner said, we would have the bylaw available at the meeting, and subject to council overturning the decision, we'd ask for council consent then to bring the bylaws forward at the same meeting.
Okay, well, clear answer. Clear answer. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Allen. I'm going to have you do it. All those in favor? And the motion carries to adjourn. Thank you.